Chris Martin, welcome to Apollos Watered.
Thanks for having me.
You were getting ready to take a drink just as I asked you the question, weren't you?
I was, but it's fine.
Are you ready for the Fast Five?
I am.
Okay, here we go. This is an easy one. Favorite restaurant when you were a kid? That's an easy one.
Well, not really. I got to think back to what did I like eating when I was a kid?
It's usually McDonald's. It has to be like McDonald's.
I didn't really like McDonald's that much.
What?
Yeah. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is I loved Papa John's pizza when I was a kid. I still do. But like I loved Papa John's pizza when I was a kid. So that was probably one of my favorites, to be sure. And then I think I like Burger King more than McDonald's, honestly. But what's funny is like I didn't start liking burgers till like middle school. So I was like a chicken nugget kid till I was like 14. I remember always joking, like, why do they call this place Burger King? Burgers are gross. They should, call it Chicken King or something like that. Because I just ate chicken nuggets at all those places. But yeah, so I think Papa John's pizza was definitely, like, my dad didn't really like it. And so whenever he would travel for business, I would like beg my mom, like, can we get Papa John's because dad's going out of town?
Did you get the garlic? Did you get that garlic butter sauce?
Oh yeah. And I never really liked getting sausage on pizza other places, but I loved getting it there. And so that's what I would always want, is like sausage pizza. But yeah.
I just want the garlic butter. I'll take that with anything. I mean, that's
sure. I ended up when I was when I was in high school, I worked at like a mom and pop pizza place, and that's when I like learned what real garlic butter was, and I was like, oh man, this is actually real garlic butter, not like the hydrogenated peanut oil at
Don't ruin it for me.
But it's still good. No. Hey, look, there's literally one. There's one probably a 7-minute walk and a 30-second drive from our house. So when we want cheap pizza, that's what we get. And I still eat that stuff. Come on. I mean, it's
well, it's pizza. It's like how bad is your pizza craving? That's the other thing. Right. Like certain pizzas, you're like, hate that pizza.
I maintained it's the best fast food pizza. I have a newsletter called The Funnies that delivers every Saturday, which is like a collection. It's meant to be like a modern day Sunday funny section in a newspaper. But it's like a collection of funny tweets and memes and stuff like that. And there are a couple thousand people subscribed to it. And I asked them in a poll recently, out of all these fast food pizza places, which one is your favorite? And I was proud of my audience, because all couple hundred people that responded, the most popular was Papa John's. And I agree. Like my opinion is still that I like Papa John's better than Pizza Hut or Domino's or the others. Domino's came in a close second, I think. But yeah, anyway, so random pizza opinions.
But I like to hear what people are doing, and even the fact that you surveyed people, that makes it kind of fun for me to know, well, what did other people do?
Every week I ask a random poll question at the top of the funnies, and that was the one I thought of that week. So
all right, well, here's the next question. Because you are, according to your book, you are the content editor, right? So content marketing editor. I don't know exactly what content marketing means, but I think I have an idea. But here's my question. Marketing to me means what?
For me, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, that's you. To you. Marketing to you means what?
That's a good question. Marketing to me, in a very kind of dictionary, like if I were to give a dictionary definition for it, and then maybe more of a personal spin, marketing to me, when I think of marketing, I think of explaining to someone why they should pay for something. And that, you think money right away, but I don't even necessarily think that. I think marketing is basically making your case. It's persuasive. It's making your case for why someone should pay your podcast attention, why someone should buy your pizza over someone else's, why someone should watch your TV program over someone else's. Marketing at its core, because we all have a limited amount of resources, of attention, of money, or whatever, that we have to make decisions of how we spend these resources that we have. And marketing is basically saying, spend your time, money, eyeballs, whatever, on this thing instead of that other thing. And so I think at its core, that's kind of what marketing is. Now, marketing has a number of layers to it. I didn't go to school for marketing, so anything I know about marketing, I've just learned from doing on my own, kind of in the field. I went to school for Bible and ministry. But content marketing, and this gets into my more personal spin, content marketing is like the first impression of marketing. So I've never really liked selling anything. I think in some ways, my mom's always said that I could be a good salesperson, and I maybe I could sell cars or whatever, but I don't like selling. I don't like telling people what to do with their money or whatever. So I've never been interested in being like a book marketer, for example, like the person who tries to go out and get people to buy books. However, content marketing has always been incredibly interesting to me, because what content marketing is it offers content at like the very, very top. If you want to think of like a marketing funnel, where the bottom of the funnel is where someone decides to purchase something. The top of the funnel is where you kind of first even learn that thing exists, that maybe one day you'll buy. Content marketing is like, instead of, hey, come buy this thing, it's more, let me demonstrate to you why this thing is so cool and why this thing is so helpful or whatever. And so historically, my almost my whole career has been in content marketing for now 2 different Christian publishers, first Lifeway and now Moody. But how marketing has played itself out in my life is not selling books or selling something, but more so, like, I run a website today called BibleToLife.com that's full of like 700 articles, 90% of which are excerpts from books that we've published over the last 100 years. And those are little sections of books that, unless you read those books, you would have never come across and learned about that particular thing from that particular author. And so that's content marketing, in that I'm providing a piece of content that's incredibly valuable in and of itself, that's helpful for whoever comes across it, can serve them, bless them, encourage them in one way or another. And if they come and read that article and leave and never buy the book, I don't care, because we've blessed them with the content that's been sitting on our shelf for 100 years, and they've been blessed by that in a way they wouldn't have otherwise. Now, if they do happen to then buy that book, awesome, all the better for the company that I work for and the author, but I'm most interested in stewarding the content that we have to serve people in a different way than we're currently serving them. And yeah, do we hope that maybe one day they would go buy that book? Sure. But that's not a metric we use to determine success for content marketing. It's more, how many people are you engaging, and to what degree are you engaging them? And so that's marketing to me, is more using content in my space to serve people in a way that maybe they wouldn't be served otherwise. So that's sorry, a bit of a long-winded answer, but it can be quite complicated.
But it's actually an awesome answer. I think it helps. One of the things that your book talks about, and we're going to get to that in a minute, is just the narcissism that breeds. I mean, even with marketing, that's one of the things that I hate doing the ministry that we do. It's like, this seems to be counterintuitive to what the gospel teaches us.
Sure.
Here it's like promotion of self, the personality, the conflict, all the things that we're going to delve into in just a moment. But the lifestyle that Jesus advocates is the quiet, the humility, the peaceful, and it seems to be the opposite.
And that's why like I'll go on 100 podcasts like this before I'll send 100 tweets, even though the 100 tweets would take me a 10th of the effort, because this is actually going to be helpful and interesting for someone. Even if they never go buy my book, I don't care. It's been interesting and helpful. Whereas if I just tweet like, hey, please go buy my book, it's just like, I just feel weird. I just feel weird about that. I don't think there's anything implicitly wrong with it. I just feel weird. So that's where, like, this is content marketing for my book. It's even content marketing for your ministry. And because it's providing a value and a service for someone, expecting nothing in return,
That's well, yes, is right. I just never heard of the term content marketing, because it's new to me. I mean,
sure.
But now I know that my marketing director is going to be talking about this with me, because it's my wife. But let's go to the next question. Number 3, because you are in tech a lot and you're online quite a bit, especially with all the stuff that you talk about, if you could meet one tech person and interview him or her, it would be who and why?
Could be living or dead.
Either way.
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I kind of figured that.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah.
What would you want to ask him?
Why did you suck so much? No, sorry if that's inappropriate for the podcast.
No, it's actually pretty much appropriate for the show.
No, because like the dude was like, I mean, like in the Mount Rushmore of most revolutionary people in the history of the world, in some respect, like in just in terms of technology and how he thought about technology, at least in the top 5 most important Americans ever to live. Maybe, I don't know. I'm probably, maybe that's too high, but like just in terms of like, yeah, in terms of thinking outside the box and pushing the bounds of what we think could even be real, just otherworldly, but also just such a terrible person to people. And so if anyone listening has never read Walter Isaacson's biography on Steve Jobs that came out right after he died, read it. It's just incredible. And I mean, Walter Isaacson just followed him around for years as he was leading up to his death. So just a truly remarkable person, obviously gave us technology that we didn't even know we wanted, which was always one of the hallmarks of what he did, but also just like his willingness to never settle for less than the best. And even though that's what led to a lot of his mistreatment of people, that just sort of tenacity is, I think, really admirable. And then also his love for creativity and just like the kind of putting the soul back in technology, when at that time it was just getting so techie, so with Microsoft and everything, it was getting so kind of like for the nerds, and nothing against nerds, I am one, but he kind of made technology cool and something that everybody should want to be interested in. And so I just think that's really a lasting legacy that's cool. And he just is an endlessly fascinating person in so many ways, with his background in Eastern religions and all kinds of like random interesting things about him. So yeah, anyway, that's probably the one. That's probably the one.
All right, here's the next question. The current trend right now, you could do without, would be what and why?
Current trend? Oh my gosh. Like in everything? Oh my word. Current trend. Those darn Stanley water cups, man. You ever seen this?
No.
Oh my gosh. There are going to be a handful of people listening who either just like groaned in admiration of what I just said, or like throwing their giant Stanley water cups at me. Just Google like Stanley water cup and I don't know if you'll know what I'm saying, but they're endlessly popular right now, especially among young women. And it's like, I've seen a joke online that's like, every few years a new water bottle comes around that convinces young women that they're finally going to drink the water they need to, or something like that. And it's like a joke, and my wife is like, yeah, you're right, that's right. But yeah, I just they're so
like
pervasive.
A travel mug with the straw in it.
Yeah, dude, but they're so like, it's one of those things that exploded like a year ago because of a bunch of Instagram influencers, and then everybody got them because it was like trendy. And now everyone has them to the point that it's like cringe. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Oh yes.
So that I won't carry my wife's Stanley Cup into church. I'll carry her purse.
Like a hockey thing, I'll carry Stanley Cup.
I know. I'll carry her purse. I'll carry our daughter. I said, no, you're carrying that cup. I don't want to be seen with that. It's so petty. It's so petty.
Oh, with my house, my wife gets like every coffee cup you could think of as a gift.
Yeah.
She likes to tell her mood on her t-shirts and on her mugs.
Yeah, fair.
And even for Mother's Day, my son, he wanted to get a mug made for her that said, "I love mugs." I was like, this is a problem. My brother-in-law lived with us for a bit, and he's like, you have a sickness. Like, we don't have any more room. We got to get rid of this stuff.
Dude, you got to get her a Stanley Cup.
No, that's the last thing we need. So my wife has a thing against plastic because she doesn't want to get like the particles and stuff like that. So we have metal straws.
Yeah,
she uses it all the time. And I'm like, what? Can't you just drink it? I don't understand. She's like, it's better than straw. I'm like, I want to be pro metal straw, but like my teeth hurt thinking about it. I just feel like I'm accidentally gonna like clamp down and like just like teeth on metal just like gives me the heebie-jeebies. Well, how about this one? How about this? This isn't one of the questions, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Would you take a metal straw or one of those cardboard ones that they've been using to replace the plastic ones?
Yeah. Probably one of the cardboard ones, even though both
Oh.
are reprehensible to me. Mostly because I'm gonna drink the drink fast enough that the cardboard ones. I'm not gonna let a drink sit there for like so long. Because I've used cardboard straws before to the point that they don't disintegrate, but it gets kind of like to the point where it's like, okay, this is a bit much. Whereas the metal straw, yeah, I know the metal straw, like I almost get goosebumps thinking about it. Like it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, putting my teeth on a metal straw. I'd have to have one of those like little silicone things on the end, but I guess that kind of maybe kills the point for someone like your wife who's like, no, the whole point is to get away from that.
See, I would just take the top off, whatever it is, and drink
Yeah,
it.
well, yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'm like, what is wrong? Okay.
I'm not a big straw guy generally, so.
Yeah, I'm not either. But number 5. All right, here's the last one. You can't use your own here. This is just a caveat, but here it is. If you could be a website, you would be what website and why?
Oh gosh, such an abstract question.
Yeah, existential.
What kind of website would I want to be? Man, I mean, like Wikipedia is pretty amazing. I mean, I don't use Wikipedia like a ton, but if you think about like the fact that Wikipedia exists and is free is kind of like a marvel of the internet and of like humanity. Like the fact that we can go to this place that's like a reference library for a compendium of all like human knowledge is just like wild that exists. Like a lot of us, it's easy to like rag on Wikipedia or whatever, especially if you're like, hey, don't use it to cite, don't cite Wikipedia in your papers.
Or journalist articles.
but it's great as a jumping off point of like, oh, you want to learn about this random subject? Go to the citations in Wikipedia and you can find like 100 really great articles. And yeah, I think we don't appreciate Wikipedia enough. So I guess I think that's a great website and I wish I used it more. But if I ever need it, it's there, like if I need to know what the top 5 most secure prison systems in the United States are, I can go see what they are and who's in which one and which one is this guy, like that. Go down some random Wikipedia rabbit hole at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday when we're watching a movie. It's a great tool.
I'm laughing because that's what I do. That's the biggest sickness. My wife hates watching movies with me because every time I watch a movie, I start looking up like the actors, background of the story, and she's like, "Just watch the movie." I'm like, I'm trying to get background information. I want to get the full flavor of who they are, the character. And she's like, I get that. Okay, well, here we go. Let's jump into talking a little bit about you and the book. We're going to talk about your book, The Wolf in Their Pockets. But before we do, a little bit of your biography, who you are, when you came to faith, some of your family story, and how in the world did you ever come to be a content marketing editor and doing a website? I mean, you do termsofsurface.social, and you also mentioned the BibleToLife.com. I mean, how did you get into that?
Oh gosh. All right. This is a lot. This is a long podcast, right? So we got plenty of time.
It is.
Okay. So
how we roll, baby. How we roll.
This is far more interesting than in my book anyway. So so I was born and raised in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is up in the north. Most people haven't heard of Fort Wayne, which is understandable, but it is the second largest city in Indiana, clocking in around 300,000 people, I think. So I was born and raised there. It's an hour south of Michigan, 15 minutes west of the Ohio border, couple hours north of Indy there up in the corner. Was born to my parents, Joe and Catherine. My mom worked in a doctor's office for a while when I was a kid. She was an ENT specialist, speech therapist. My dad worked for IBM. So that's actually super significant, as you can imagine, to my life in a lot of ways. My dad worked for IBM. He went to Purdue University, got a computer science degree, and started working for IBM in like the early 80s. And so he was working at IBM when IBM was like the household name, like a lot of like Facebook is today. Like a lot of tech companies you hear talked about today in the 80s and 90s, IBM was one of those. It still is kind of a household name, but they do a lot more business kind of stuff now than consumer product stuff. So But yeah, in the 80s and 90s, IBM was like a massive kind of, was one of the computer companies. And he actually, I was born in 1990. He started working from home in like 1992 or 3. So in fact, we have like the newspaper clipping. I post it on social every once in a while, where like the local newspaper in Fort Wayne came and did a story on my dad, because they were doing a broader story on an increasing number of people were working for. They were like, 1 million people across the country are working from home. Isn't that crazy? They're like, Joe Martin has his son Christopher can sit on his lap while he takes phone calls, and he even has a second phone line to take phone calls. And it's like, it's so funny because it's like my dad in like a shirt and tie sitting at a desk in our like converted dining room in our house, and like he did not wear dress clothes in our house when he was working from home. He wore like the same worn out Nike t-shirt and khaki shorts, like but yeah, so I grew up with a mom who ended up stopping working when my brother was born in 93, and my dad working from home for IBM virtually my whole life until I graduated. And so my parents were always around. I could never get in trouble, even if I wanted to. And my dad worked for a massive computer company. So we always had computers like right when they came out. Like, like Windows 95 came out, and we had an IBM computer with Windows 95 on it, like the day it came out or whatever. I was not even in first grade or kindergarten. And I remember tinkering around with it as young as first grade, when a couple of my friends maybe had home computers. And so I just remember, but before anyone who's in first grade knew how, I would not want to give a first grader free access to a computer and the internet today, or a phone and the internet today. But back then, I didn't know how to get into anything I shouldn't have. I was just, poking around on Minesweeper on my computer, or trying to find the website for Nickelodeon.com because it was my favorite channel to watch, And so grew up tinkering with computers a lot. And with a dad, obviously working in computers who knew that stuff and would kind of help me tinker with them. Went elementary school, middle school, got to high school, started writing a lot in late middle school, early high school, really started to fall in love with writing. Well, first of all, I went to communications magnet school for elementary school. And so I went to an elementary school where we started learning Spanish in kindergarten. Now I went to a different school for kindergarten because my mom wanted me in all day kindergarten. Don't know why she didn't want to see me all day, but I can't imagine why. But we got me in all day kindergarten at a different school. But first grade through fifth grade, I had Spanish every year. We had a TV studio in our school, so like we were learning how to work cameras and teleprompters and stuff like that. And we had a school newspaper, which maybe is more common today, but back then I think it was kind of a feature of our communications magnet school. And so I remember like writing for our little school newspaper when I was in 4th and 5th grade, and doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And I really fell in love with that kind of thing as early as then. And then middle school, I started writing a blog, actually in 8th grade, on LiveJournal. That blog still exists, believe it or not. And no, you cannot have the link. But it's quite embarrassing, but I am glad it still exists because it's kind of like a relic of my first writing on the internet. In high school, I have to mention this because it's super formative to why I even write at all today. My freshman year, I was put in an experimental thing they were trying called an English keyboarding block. So I went to a school that just had like 4 1.5-hour classes each day. And then they changed at the semester break. So it was like a block schedule. I understand that it still exists, but maybe isn't as common as it was back then. And so they had this thing that they were doing where the first and second period of the day was an English class and a typing class, keyboarding class. And so it was an honors English keyboarding block. And I got there as a freshman, and I think I had English first and then keyboarding. And then the keyboarding class, those 2 classes were across the hall. And so we would just, at the period break and after first period, like 9:30 or so, we would just walk right across the hall. And it was almost like we had one giant class of 50 kids, but it was two 25-person classes, and we just kind of were sister classes and would walk across the hall from each other. And so I had English, and then I had a typing class where we would learn how to type, which kind of even felt a little dated in 2005, but because I had been typing online for years at that point, but I had never been like taught how to type. And so we were using like typing software to learn how to type more efficiently, which probably did help me. I don't sit on home row or whatever like they taught us, but it was kind of like this crucible of writing. Like I had an amazing freshman, and we did the same thing sophomore year, but he was an amazing teacher. His name is Mr. Hauser. He's a principal now, which like makes me happy because that way he can help other teachers, but makes me sad that he's not like in the classroom anymore. And he was have you ever seen Friday Night Lights, like the TV show?
Yeah.
Okay. He's like Coach Taylor to a T. But also a brilliant like literature mind and writing mind. And he wore like he was a Catholic school guy. So like I didn't go to a Catholic school, but he like was from the Catholic background. So he was like in a button-down shirt and a tie like every day, but very like Coach Taylor, rah. He was the linebacker coach on the football team. I was on the football team. And so we knew each other through that. But Mr. Hauser, he would just come in like bouncing with energy every day. Like, you know, he would really get us jazzed about Shakespeare as, you know, freshmen in high school. But like we would have spirited debates about like what this piece of literature meant or whatever. And but for that class, this is why it was super formative. As freshmen, we had to turn in a 2 to 4 page essay every Friday, a 2 to 4 page, a double spaced essay. So, you know, it's probably only like 500 to 1,000 words or something like that, which I like write in my sleep these days. But back then it was like, oh my gosh, I have an essay due every Friday. Are you kidding me? And I learned once I got to college, I worked in the writing center as a college student, coaching other students on how to improve their essays. And I learned that there were a lot of students who went to my private Christian college who like didn't write a single essay till like their senior year. And I was writing one a week as a freshman. And then again, I did the same thing as a sophomore. It was just, you know, for sophomores instead of freshmen. And so that taught me how to write. I mean, I was writing a lot for a 15-year-old, 14-year-old. And that taught me at first, I kind of like dreaded it, but then I think I just realized I was kind of good at it. Like I remember sitting down on every Thursday night to type my essay that was due on Friday. And my dad would be like, you know, if we're out of printer ink, because we were turning things in on paper back then, not just into some web portal. He was like, if we're out of printer ink, you're up a creek. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, but I know you. And I know we have probably like 6 months worth of printer ink stocked away in a cabinet somewhere. So I'm not too concerned. But he was always he hated procrastinating. And I, at the time, was a big time procrastinator. And so I would sit down on a Thursday night and type out a 2 to 4 page essay in like an hour. And I think at the time I was just like, you know, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but I think looking back, it was kind of impressive that I was doing this as a freshman. And I was starting to really like writing and writing quickly. And I was writing a blog regularly. And so that was super formative freshman and sophomore year. Moving along, I wrote a blog with some other kids in my town later in high school. It was like a collective where it was like a bunch of Christians in my city. I'll get to my testimony because it's woven in here in a second, but a bunch of Christians in my town who were in high school started writing a blog together. We had all been doing our own thing, but we kind of came together and started, like, each person was kind of assigned a day of the week. And so I'd write weekly and someone else, you know, I'd write on a Monday, someone else would write on a Tuesday, and we'd go like that. And that was super fun. That was around the second half of high school. And then it was my junior year. I grew up in the church, pausing the writing journey for the testimony for a second. I grew up in the church. I, in third grade, remember praying with my Sunday school teacher, praying the sinner's prayer. I don't know if I was saved then or not. I think, like a lot of people who maybe prayed the sinner's prayer as a child, you kind of wonder if you actually believed it or if you're just doing it. I don't know. You know, if I ever get to ask that of the Lord, I'll genuinely wonder, was I written in the Lamb's Book of Life, or was that when it all happened, or was it not? You know, I don't know, because my life didn't change. I remember genuinely wanting to be in a relationship with God, but it's not like I, you know, started living for Jesus as a third grader when that happened. And so come junior year of high school, I just went through some really tumultuous social stuff. This girl I'd really liked basically stopped talking. She was like my best friend, but I also really liked her, and she like stopped talking to me, and it was like awful. I like lost my best friend and also the prospect of a girlfriend, and it was really hard. And I had some other social stuff. I'd quit the football team, and so I lost like a lot of that social sphere. I had started a job that was really hard and stretching me, and so I've not had a hard life, but as a junior in high school, there was just a lot of things that were hard. School was really hard at that stage. I was struggling in math, unsurprisingly. And so it was just a hard year. And during that time, our youth pastor was preaching through a number of different kind of topical series. And one of them was on worry and anxiety. And came across Matthew 6 about, at the end there where it's talking about, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough trouble of its own. Lord's going to clothe the lilies of the field. Won't he clothe you? Like that sort of thing. And I realized that my God had kind of become my comfortable, like my friends, or my kind of comfortable life that I was living that was neat and tidy and was free of any struggle. And just kind of like said, Lord, I don't want to live that comfortable life anymore. First of all, it's gone, but I don't want to pursue that anymore. I want to find my contentment and comfort in you, not in this. And that was really a moment where things started to change for me. Now, I still was a junior in high school and went through all kinds of hiccups of a young Christian. But that's when I would say like my trajectory really changed in terms of like, okay, I'm going to try to live for the Lord now, not just live for myself. And that was the first time I'd ever thought about anything like that, really. And so I think that's when like my Christian faith, if it was a thing before that, went from being a feature of my life to sort of the hub of the wheel, and kind of started to drive a lot of other things in how I lived and conducted myself in friendships and things like that. So that was junior year of high school. Continued writing, went and graduated. I was planning on going to Purdue for computer science, to kind of, because I wanted to go into technology. I was on the school newspaper, was a editor there, and also had like a tech column. I wrote a tech column for my school newspaper when the iPhone was announced in January 2007. So yeah, that's like, depending on how you're listening, you either think I'm old now or you think, wow, you're young, depending on the audience. But yeah, I covered the iPhone release when I was a junior in high school in my school newspaper. So like, I love that kind of stuff. And I was always investigating. Like I was on Twitter in 2007, which was like when it was first ever announced. I remember creating the account in my journalism class in high school. And so I was just super interested. And I was like, I can make a lot of money doing this kind of thing. These folks out at Google are making all kinds of money. And so that was money. Like I still had this sort of idol of wealth at that point that the Lord had not taken away from me. And so I was planning on doing computer science at Purdue. I went and applied and accepted and talked to the head of the department and all that kind of stuff. But then I didn't love my visit at Purdue. I didn't love how big the campus was, and it was just super intimidating. I mean, I went to a massive public high school where I graduated with 600 other students. But like just my college being the size of a city, just like I was like, man, this seems overwhelming. I don't know. At the same time, I realized how much math was involved in computer science. Like I realized that I like what my dad does, and I like the idea of working in tech as long as I don't have to use math. But I knew to get there, I would have to do math, and I was really struggling in math at the time, and like just hated it. And so I was like, man, I really love what a computer science degree could get me in terms of a career, but I don't know if I could do 4 years of this, like calculus and stuff like this. And so I was like, I think I should look at something else. And so someone encouraged me to look at a smaller school. And so I looked at Taylor University, which is a small Christian college, Christian liberal arts school near where I was living. If you've never heard of it, if anyone listening has never heard of it, I've said, have you heard of Wheaton? Yeah. Oh, it's like Wheaton, but in the middle of the cornfields in Indiana. That's basically what it is. And so I applied there, got in. Around this time, my dad lost his job. This was the 2008-2009 recession. My dad lost his job at 27 years at IBM. It was the only place he'd ever worked. It really shook our family. I had just committed to go to Taylor, which cost like 45 to 50 grand a year, whereas Purdue was going to be like 20 grand a year or something. So here I am, like I feel super selfish making this decision to go to this private Christian school, which was never in the plan, to pursue an English education degree to teach high school English, to be like Mr. Hauser. And I was like, there's no way my family's going to be able to afford this. Like there was never an expectation that I would be paying fully for my college, but I was like, there's no way my parents are going to be able to pay for this now, given that dad just lost his job in the recession. And so I felt awful. My dad got a job pretty quickly, all things considered, that required him to go to an office again, and also paid like half of what he was getting paid before, but it was a job, which at the time was huge. And they said, hey, you know what, if you can get enough money at Taylor to get it down to about what Purdue would be, you can still go. And so, man, it was hard. This was like getting in the spring of my senior year. And my admissions counselor at Taylor saw my blog, my high school blog that I was a part of, and thought it was pretty impressive, I guess. And offered me a half tuition scholarship I went through an interview process, and eventually I was I was offered half tuition scholarship that got tailored down to in itself, got tailored down to the cost of Purdue. And so I was like, man, I mean, I'm not, I'm not super attuned to like signs from the Lord and stuff like this, but this seems as clear as anything to me. Like this just happened to fall in our lap because this dude came across it. I posted my admissions essay to my blog, which pinged Taylor's Google search alerts that, hey, this guy talked about Taylor on this blog, which is how my admissions counselor saw it, which led to me getting a scholarship that was worth like $80,000 or whatever over the course of 4 years. So yeah, pretty amazing. And so I ended up going to Taylor, started out majoring in English education, planning to be a high school English teacher. Toward the end of my freshman year, I started reading like Christian books for the first time, like theology books and Christian living books. I had read like a couple in high school, Crazy Love, another one. But I was reading Don't Waste Your Life as a freshman in college. And I found that I kind of felt this, and some friends had saw this in me, but I was resisting what I and others were seeing as a call to ministry of some kind. And I was leading Bible studies on campus that I organized. I was teaching regularly. I was doing a lot of discipleship. It was just, there was a lot of fruit coming out, like ministry fruit coming out of me. And I was resisting deciding to go into ministry because I didn't want to be a youth pastor and live on food stamps for the rest of my life. The Lord had already taken away the idol of making a bunch of money in Silicon Valley. He worked that out my senior year of high school and was like, hey, you want to do this as much for the money as anything else. And maybe that's not a good motivation. And so that was something that I'd already kind of been working on. And so, but I was like, I'm not going to make a lot of money as a high school English teacher, but at least like if I get an English education degree, like that's what you're going to do. Like you're getting certified in high school teaching and in English. You're not going to go teach elementary school because that's a whole other deal. So I was like, I'm going to be a high school English teacher. And I liked the sort of like the rails that I had in that, and like the certainty of like, I know what I'm going to do. And like, basically a handful of friends, including the woman who had let me down as a junior in high school, who is a friend at college and is now my wife. She was like, hey, me and other people think the Lord's calling you to ministry and you just need to stop being afraid and do it. And I was like, okay, I think you're probably right. I think I sensed that too. And I was reading Don't Waste Your Life, and there was a section in there that really was convicting me about the same thing. And so at the end of my freshman year, I kind of, in a cowardly way, I was afraid to call my parents and tell them, hey, I think I'm going to change to a Bible major, because they were paying for my school and I knew how hard it was. And they're believers, but I knew that they were going to have the same fears about a Bible major as I did, of like, what's this going to be, that kind of thing. And so they were hesitant but supportive. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. Really, I was like, if you get a Bible major, you're going to be a pastor or you're going to be a missionary. And I don't really want to go live somewhere else. So I guess I'm going to be a pastor, but I don't really know what that means. Like, I'm assuming that's going to have to lead to me going to seminary or something, but I don't know. I just feel like I need to take the step of obedience, basically. It's like how I felt. And so I changed my major to Bible. And at the end of my freshman year, finished out that degree a semester early. In January of 2013, I officially graduated. My wife, who was just my fiance at that point, finished out her degree, graduated May of 2013, 10 years ago. Wow, 10 years ago. And we got married June 1st, 2013. And we were planning on doing seminary at Trinity outside of Chicago. But I did not get the full ride that I was a finalist for. So that was a nope, because that place was super expensive. And so I'd only been accepted to Southern Seminary other than that. And so we were like, well, we don't know what we're going to do between now and the fall when I could theoretically start school. So we went and lived at a summer camp in Michigan that we'd worked at throughout college. And they gave us a camper to live in for the summer. So my wife and I spent the first 3 months of our marriage living in a camper at a Christian summer camp, which was actually a blast because we had a bunch of friends who still worked there. And so we did that throughout the summer, eventually applied for a job that was posted to Twitter to manage the blog and social media of a guy named Ed Stetzer at Lifeway Christian Resources, which I had no idea what Lifeway was, but I'd been reading Ed's blog throughout college when his blog is at Christianity Today. And so I knew who he was. And so I was like, well, Nashville has a Southern Seminary Extension campus. So I've already been accepted to the school. We were having trouble finding jobs in Louisville. This was like July. We were planning on moving like August, and my wife and I didn't know anybody in Louisville, and we were planning on moving there for school, but I was like, we're not going to have a job. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. And then this job was posted to Twitter. I was like, well, I know how to run blog and social media, and I have a Bible degree. So I don't think Stetzer's probably looking for a 22-year-old kid who just graduated from college, but it's as good of a lead as we have of anything. And there's an extension campus there. And so I'll apply. So I applied, and they got back to me immediately. I didn't even tell my wife I applied, which was a mistake, but I was like 2 months into marriage here. So give me a break. We had literally never been to Nashville, either one of us ever. So anyway, applied, interviewed, got the job managing Stetzer's blog at CT and his social media. I was 22. We moved to Nashville Labor Day of 2013. I ended up doing my MDiv through Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary instead of Southern because of we ended up going to a church here that was kind of set up as a mini extension campus for Southeastern, and then worked at Lifeway in a number of different roles over the course of about 7 years. Ended up in the last couple of years, my time there being head of social media at Lifeway. So I was head of social media at Lifeway, I like to say, and probably Lifeway's most tumultuous, like 3 years of its existence. We had election 2016. We had the closure of bookstores, which I ran our social media during that whole situation, which was a nightmare. And then coronavirus and a handful of very high profile controversies around authors and personalities affiliated with our publication, our publishing house and stores. So it was a very tumultuous time, but I was overseeing about 170 social media accounts and about 70 social media managers, and living on social media all day, every day. It was around 2017, 2018. I started studying social media from more of a big picture perspective. I read Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death for the first time and was really blown away by how applicable this book from 1985 about the television, written by a non-Christian, was to how we should be viewing social media as Christians in the 21st century. And I said, man, I really wish Postman was still around to write about this today. And I wasn't aware of who was writing. I knew of a lot of Christians writing on Christianity and tech generally, or even phones, but I didn't know many Christians. I was reading a ton of non-Christians writing for like the New York Times and other major outlets, just talking about social media and internet culture. But I wasn't reading a lot of Christians talking about social media and internet culture. And those conversations are very different than conversations about phones. And so I was like, I feel like we could use a more Christian perspective on what social media is doing to us in a sort of Postman-esque way. And so I set out to do that across a few different avenues at first. And that all consolidated to in early 2020, kind of right before the pandemic started. I want to say it was like February-ish. I started this newsletter called Terms of Service, which is run through Substack. And so that's the writing bit. Around that same time, I left Lifeway because of a handful of things, and thought I wanted to stay in Christian publishing because I'd really found like, oh, this is a way I could use gifts and still like do ministry. Like in every role I've ever had in both Lifeway and Moody, I've been very cognizant of the Lord called me to ministry. I never had this idea that that could be anything but pastor or missionary. And so I just didn't have a concept of what that would be. But in every role I've ever had has felt like doing ministry in these Christian publishing houses. And so I was looking for a way to do ministry elsewhere. And I had a friend who worked at Moody Publishers, and I was aware of Moody. And they said, hey, we could really use your skill set for this role. And I was like, hey, I'm happy to come help you guys out. And so that's how I ended up in the role that I'm in. And it really was like, hey, we want somebody who can live outside of the publishing process. Because everybody at Moody Publishers is like acquiring books to be published, or designing books that are going to be published, or printing books that are being published. But nobody could really live outside of that process and kind of be the skunkworks guy, like the guy that says, hey, we've never tried this. Why don't we try this? And that's kind of what I was hired to do. And because of my background in social and digital stuff, that's where we focused a lot of my energy right when I got here, which led to the creation of this website called BibleToLife.com. And so I can talk more about that, but it's not as much pertain to the book. Back to the personal writing, continued writing with Terms of Service. That newsletter led to a publishing of a book by the same name, Terms of Service, in February of 2022. That book, Terms of Service, was meant to be kind of a mirror. I call it like a mirror book. The purpose of that book is to say, what is my relationship with social media and what is that relationship doing to me? Like, what is my relationship with social media doing to me? It's really for anybody and everybody. In fact, I wrote it such that my Christian worldview is present, but I wanted it to be accessible to a non-Christian. So I didn't like, it's not like a theology of social media. It's more just like, hey, I'm a Christian. That should be clear. But just from a very broad perspective, why are we obsessed with social media and what's that doing to us? That led to a lot of feedback that said, hey, this book is good, but we could use one for leaders specifically and Christian leaders. And so I said, yeah, I think you're probably right. So I got an agent and I started talking about, hey, I think there's a need for this book. He agreed. We came up with a proposal for a book for Christian leaders of various kinds, whether it's a parent, a lay leader, or pastor, somebody who's really actively discipling someone else, which should be all of us, but someone who's discipling someone else. And who recognizes that social media is maybe a more formative discipleship force in the lives of the people they care about than they are, or than Scripture is. And let's write a book for those people who want to know how to kind of push back the discipleship power of social media and replace it with Scripture and the Holy Spirit. And so that's what we set out to do with The Wolf in Their Pockets. And that was a very kind of long, but still seems abbreviated lead up to how we got to where we are.
And I want to delve into The Wolf in Our Pockets. I actually had Moody approach me about reading the book, and I hadn't heard of you. And I thought, but
most people haven't.
Well, but the concept was something that I was interested in, because we've had Jay Kim on here, we've had Felicity Wu's song, we've talked about the power of media and how it is forming us. And one of the things that we do try to talk about on the show is spiritual formation. And oftentimes when people think of spiritual formation, they think of being in a small group or being in church and hearing the Bible preached, but they don't often realize how much the technology and the social media that we are in today is actually forming them spiritually. And this is why I think I enjoyed this book. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I was very pleasantly surprised. And I enjoyed the book tremendously. I have to say that, because this is where people are living day in and day out. And having been a pastor for over 20 years in a variety of different situations, from the very birth of social media and seeing it take place in church, I went into pastoral ministry in the late 90s. And then it wasn't really a thing yet. I was there when people started getting on Facebook, but only a few were. And then more and more and more. And then the next thing I know, we're having meetings as staff to talk about the post of someone in the church and how we were going to handle it. And I went, wait, when did that happen? When I didn't take a class in this. And then the reaction of some was to just get off of social media. Let's not be on it, but it's here to stay. It's here to stay. People are involved in it. And even the title of your book, you said The Wolf in Their Pockets, which automatically brings to mind this picture of really the demonic in a way of the devil getting into our lives. And I feel the same way. I remember, I have teenagers, and I remember when we first got married, I was saying to my wife, my children will never have a television in their room. And then suddenly they get phones because it was advantageous. Their friends had it. It was an easy way for me to pick them up. And we know just the easy steps to bring it in. And then they're in it, and we see them in it 24/7. And even now, when I take my son to school, there's a bus stop we drive by with all of these teenagers, and all of them are staring at their phones, whether it's, and it depends on the platform. Some are Instagram, some are Discord, some are like, that's my son's preferred platform, where mine would be Facebook. My wife is Instagram. My editor is Twitter. I mean, all of these different pieces. But you give us some guidelines, and you mentioned the subtitle of the book is 13 Ways the Social Internet Threatens the People That You Lead. And I wanted to explore this because your chapter titles were very brief, but that you get an idea. Dethrone entertainment, recover purpose, build friendships, reorder priorities, foster discernment, seek humility, live peaceably, kill cynicism. I'm going to go through all of them anyway. Rethink authority, understand sex, grapple with anxiety, reject conspiracy theories, and redirect worship. I remember reading the table of contents going, okay, where is he going to go? And then right from the get-go, you go for the jugular in dethrone entertainment. And you mentioned that entertainment has become almost part and parcel of the worship. I mean, we even talk about the worship experience today. How has, let's start there, because that kind of lays a baseline for where we're at right now, we have started to basically merge church in the Sunday morning with entertainment. And why is that a bad thing? Start there.
Yeah, because we're made to cultivate in worship, not consume worship. That's the real reason, I think, that like the core. My church that I go to here outside Nashville, we have a number of like values pillars, I think we call them, that are like promises we make to one another. And I can tell already just by saying this that we do a good job of reminding each other of them, because I'm sure other churches I've attended have had values like this, and I could never have told you them. But we recite like in our benediction at the end of our service every Sunday, somebody kind of reminds us of one of them. And the one from this past week was the reminder that we promise to cultivate, not consume, in the worship gathering. And so I think, I grew up in a church that I love. I don't want to dog them. They were very important to my formative spiritual development. But like, I would show up to church on Sunday, and I think a lot of people can align with this. They understand what I'm talking about. Show up to church on Sunday. You walk in, you sit wherever you want. You stand up when instructed to do so. You sing. Perhaps maybe you're singing. You're like, oh, the bands, they sound nice, or they're great. Or maybe you're a good Christian and you're like, and you don't really care how the band sounds. You're just engaging in worshiping the Lord in that moment. Like I say good Christian tongue in cheek. Like I find myself paying attention to the band as much as I do pay attention to the actual words I'm singing. So I'm not saying, that's bad, but you engage with the singing, you sit down, you laugh at the pastor's joke, you say, oh, that's some interesting insight. Good sermon, pastor. You leave, you go home, you come back for the same thing next week. And it's just a sort of event. That's a very typical, I think, American Christian experience. I think that's the kind of church I grew up in, that I spent a lot of time in over the years. And I think the Lord can work through those worship environments. I don't think they're like inherently wrong. However, I look at that compared to like the worship environment that our elders set up for us today in our church. And we come in every Sunday. Basically, there are people like our greeters are handing out cards that have different parts of the liturgy, I guess. We're a Southern Baptist church, but we have some high church elements, I guess you could say, at our church, where that have like the opening scripture reading, that have the scripture that comes after our time of confession. Historically, we've had somebody go up who's been assigned to go up and recite the Apostles' Creed, like lead us in reciting the Apostles' Creed. And we have somebody who's assigned to read that pillar at the end to remind us of what we've promised to do as church members and our benediction verse. A church member is asked to read an opening verse. When we do communion, which is a couple times a month, I think, we stand around in a circle, and a church member is asked to lead us in a prayer. Like we have like little groups around the room that stand around that stand in a circle and take the elements together in like a small group setting. We confess silently, and then someone else gets up and reads a prayer of a prayer of confession for us, and like a reminder that we've been forgiven from Scripture. And then the benediction at the end. All of this is to say, there's a sort of interactive environment in the current church, the Sunday worship gathering that I'm a part of, that I've never experienced before. And I never really realized what I was lacking until I started experiencing this, because I participate in the worship gathering in a way, we as a body participate in the worship gathering in a way that no church I've ever been a part of does. You participate in the worship gathering in the minds of a lot of people if you're on stage singing or preaching. Otherwise, you're there as an audience in a way. Obviously, you and I and others listening probably know that's not the right way to think of it, but I think it would be fair to say that a lot of folks who show up on Sunday do think of it that way. But I think to the degree that we can, as church leaders, set up worship experiences, if you want to use that word, worship environments, in such a way that we interact more than we consume, that we cultivate more than we consume, we might kind of ignite a fire for worship in a way that hearing other people worship and lead and preach simply doesn't. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No,
yeah.
it does. Actually, I'm very intrigued because we just had Jeff Christopherson, and I'm not exactly sure if I'm running this episode before him or after him, but he's the head of the Canada Baptist Convention. Basically, it's the Southern Baptist equivalent in Canada. Helped start Send, and he created the Church Multiplication Institute. He wrote a novel called Once You See. And in it, he basically uncovers how our modern conception of church within the North American setting, pastors have become basically Sunday morning only, in that everything is geared to the Sunday morning experience. And anything outside of that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to shepherd. They really don't know how to do formation. It sounds like your church is actually doing that, which is an encouragement, because I do think, as you've written, entertainment has become the name of the game, because it's a competition for, in some respect, attendance and eyeballs. And that's what we've seen done. If you tried to not be quote unquote professional, and I'm not writing in the sense of John Piper's We Are Not Professionals, but to have your Sunday experience just this mom and pop getting up there doing weird stuff, no one's going to come. It's just the reality of the situation. If you don't have some, and I even hate to use the word professionalism, but it's done well, let's just say, with excellence. However, with the advent of technology, the more that it's become ubiquitous, and people have become more aware of that, and that has trickled into, as you said, trickled into the church. And now we're not consumers. We are, how did you put it? You said we're not consumers, but we
cultivate, we don't consume.
That's right. We cultivate, not consume. And I remember you writing about that actually in the book, because as you said before, you're not just writing this to everyday people. While it can be, you're writing this to help leaders understand how to push back against the formation that they're experiencing. And in some ways, as Trevin Wax said when he was on the show, we were talking about this, where he said, we become conveyors, but they've also become, they're representing the culture, but they're also creating and cultivating the culture. And I think that's the same idea. By imbibing the entertainment aspect within that purpose, we're actually conveying a meaning. And this goes back to the Neil Postman idea of amusing ourselves to death. We are communicating meaning and not even realizing it. And you bring that out, and how it actually is forming us. And I found myself time after time in your book, going through it, just kind of nodding to myself, going, okay. But you also bring it into terms that I thought were very understandable. I mean, even at the onset, and we're going back a little bit into your book, but you mentioned that social media today is the high school hallways of yesterday. Describe what you mean by that, because I think some of our people are even now hearing it, are turning their heads going, wait, what? Because they understand that, they feel that, but that's not something necessarily that they put together and equated with social media. But how is social media become the high school hallways of today?
Yeah, let me go back to the entertainment thing. I have one more thing to say, and then we'll go to high school hallways. Trevor's exactly right, and he's a friend of mine, really my biggest professional mentor, and we go to lunch once a month. He lives like a couple miles away from me, and he's awesome. I saw you had him on, and that's awesome. He's great, brilliant dude, and just super kind. So a couple things about entertainment, and then we'll move on. I think of play stupid games, win stupid prizes, is the first thing I think of when you try to compete in entertainment as a church. Now we're getting into ministry philosophy, and so I don't want to step on any toes, and I apologize. And I'm not a pastor, but
don't step on toes, kick shins. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Go for the knee.
The best way to win the church entertainment game is to refuse to play. And so
that's like war games. Like,
that's right.
Remember that? Refuse to play.
Yeah.
Tic-tac-toe. Classic.
That's not a game you want to win, because when you win, you
lose.
Yes, exactly.
In the long run.
That's right. And so I think of Moneyball. If anyone listening has ever seen Moneyball, have you ever seen Moneyball?
I've never seen Moneyball. I'm not a baseball guy, but that's
okay. But you'll like. It's a good movie even if you don't care about baseball, because at the core of it, and it's a great book even if you don't like baseball. It's just Anyway, at the core of it is the Oakland Athletics could never beat the New York Yankees if they tried to build a team like the New York Yankees by paying players tens of millions of dollars, because they didn't have the money. So they had to figure out a different way to win the game. And that's why they pursued players who nobody knew, that weren't going to draw eyeballs, but they knew how to get on base. And they started playing a different game. We have to do this as Christian publishers a good bit to give some insider baseball on this. Like, at Moody Publishers, we don't have the money of like a Thomas Nelson or these other massive publishers that have like New York publishing house money behind them. So like, we're not going to be able to attract authors that are going to be able to sell 1 million books the first month their book comes out, because we don't have the money to pay them up front, or we're not going to play that game. So we have to figure out a different game to play, if you will. It goes back to the same principle applies to churches. I think like, you don't want to try to play the super hype worship experience game, because it's not worth winning. And even if you could maybe win it, it's not the message you want to communicate. So I could keep going there, but that's not the point of my book, my writing, and that's not my expertise. To the point of high school hallways. This really comes from Derek Thompson in his book Hitmakers, which is a tremendous book from a number of years ago. I want to say like 2017, about really why things are popular. Everything from why certain music is popular to why things go viral on the internet. And he talks about how, back when we were in high school, even though social media was kind of becoming a thing when I was in high school, we didn't have it in our pockets really until that iPhone came out when I was a junior, but most of my friends didn't even have one of those. The high school hallway was like the performance runway of, it's like the model runway of social performance where, in class, theoretically, you're paying attention in class or doing work. There's socialization, to be sure, but it's really when you went from class to class, or even when you were in the lunchroom, where you were performing socially, or when you go to a football game on a Friday night or other extracurricular function. That's when you're performing socially. That's when you're trying to get girls to like you, get boys to like you. You're trying to make friends, all of that, kind of get more social standing. But when you went home, certainly for you, when given your age and when you would have been in high school, but also for me, even though I did have the internet and social media at home, when you're at home, you got to kind of let your hair down socially. Like the social pressures that were present in the high school hallway kind of stayed at school, or at least, you would have to go back and re-engage them at that football game when you went to it, or whatever. But you got to kind of be yourself at home. There was no pressure to perform socially once you enter the door of your house until the next time you went to another school function. Today, teens in particular, are carrying the high school hallway around in their pocket 24/7, and they're being beckoned to perform at all times. This is why I think, as Jonathan Haidt has so masterfully demonstrated over the course of the last few years, that anxiety is skyrocketing among teenagers, but especially among teenage girls, is not because of body image or whatever. I mean, those are all kind of can be factors, but it's this idea that we're carrying the high school hallways around in our pockets at all times. And to use an idea from a different book, there's no backstage where we can just retreat and kind of let our hair down and be ourselves. We must always be out on stage under the hot lights performing for people, or we feel that way. Now, adults feel that to some extent, but teenagers feel that in a whole other way because of the sort of social pressure to perform. And so I think if we want to look at, if you're in youth ministry, this is something you definitely need to be attuned to. But I think like I said, I think it pertains to adults as well. And I think we make a mistake if we relegate this matter to the youth room entirely. And so I think we should be aware of social media is like the high school hallway. We carry it around in our pockets at all times, and we feel this sort of pressure to perform. Even if we wouldn't acknowledge it, I think a lot of times we do feel it.
Oh, no question in my mind, that's what it is. Even that's, I as I said at the onset, that's the pushback that I've had towards social media. There's a part of me that goes, is it a necessary evil in our modern world? How do we use it? Because you also mentioned that it's not amoral. It's not. And I know I'm talking to our editor, Kevin, and he's maintained that for some time. He said, I've heard so many people say it's a tool, and he'd say, no, it's not. It's not just a tool. It's not amoral. It's definitely some type of moral is being created and packaged within that, because we are moral beings and we're infused with it, but it's actually playing to our basest desires of narcissism being known. And this idea of getting the click, the dopamine rush, I mean, that's been obviously communicated. But before we go any further in that, you mentioned something that I wanted to come back to. You mentioned the backstage idea, and you mentioned the church as backstage. I'd never seen that concept before. At the same time, I went, all right, if I did that, if I were to do that at my church, and I'd say the church is backstage, that would be so counterintuitive where we are as a culture today, because it is a show in some capacity, whether it's the preaching, oration, the music, the worship, or even the cadre of people coming in their clothing and their Sunday best. I'm in the South now, and I was astounded. I'd never seen hats, women wearing hats on a Sunday morning, and suddenly I did. It's not that much. And again, part of it's a cultural vestige, and I'm not trying to diss hats, but there was something that was so shocking to me coming from a Midwestern background that I'd not seen. It seemed to attract eyes, attract attention. So I've wondered, how do we help people then transform and move to this backstage idea when other people are competing down the street, and this is terrible, but they're competing for those, again, same people to get them in the door so that they can hear the message?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for anyone who hasn't read the book and maybe is confused by this backstage idea, the whole idea is that the backstage is the place where you can just be yourself, and you don't have to worry about how you're sounding, how you're looking, how you're being. Nobody's going to judge you. In a healthy home, when you're a teenager, the backstage is your house where you can come home from trying to impress your friends or trying to make your teachers happy, and you can just be who you are, and your parents you'll feel unconditional love and be accepted, even if reprimanded, but you'll feel the warm embrace of people who love you. And I make the point in the book that the church should be a backstage for us. It should be a place where we can be ourselves and not be afraid. That doesn't mean we shouldn't get called out on sin and all of that. Like, that should happen. Like, we shouldn't feel the need to not be ourselves or feel unnaturally polished in a church community. And I think, what do you do? Yeah. And I've felt that same disorientation as you a little bit when we first moved down to the Nashville area from the Midwest, where, I was not going to a church where people were, dressing in hats or other more flamboyant apparel. And down here, that was certainly more the case. Our churches that we've attended haven't been quite that way, but I know it is very culturally a thing. And yeah, there's this showiness to it in a way in a lot of our cultures that I think is interesting. And I think going back to, how do you do that if maybe the church down the street is doing the more traditional thing? And I think it comes back to this idea that I don't know who initially said this, but one of my bosses at Lifeway years ago is who I learned it from, is that you cultivate what you celebrate. If you want to cultivate a culture where everyone is always perfect and the worship experience is entertaining, then celebrate those things. If you don't want to cultivate that culture, and you want to cultivate a culture of authenticity, and you want to cultivate a culture of being able to let your hair down, and you want to cultivate a culture of cultivation rather than consumption, because we just consume everything today. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy to, if you want to have the biggest, most successful church from a worldly perspective, from like a numbers perspective and a building size perspective and an amenities perspective, then you seed ground on the entertainment value in hopes that, okay, let's just seed ground on entertainment, and then hopefully through entertainment we can teach them the good news of the gospel. Okay. But when it's then time to push people to cultivate, to serve on Sunday morning with kids, or to get involved with a community group, or to repent of sin, and they don't do that, maybe recognize that you've cultivated a culture of consumption and not repentance and cultivation and participation. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that we will reap what we sow in that regard. And so this is where I say, if you don't want to win that game, play a different game, kind of like. Mm-hmm. Our church that I go to, and I don't mean to say our church is perfect, because it certainly has its issues, and I'm not like patting myself on the back because I'm not like a pastor of our church, right? So I have not decided anything that I'm describing. I just happen to, I lead a community group and volunteer in our student ministry, but I'm not, I'm not patting myself on the back. So let me say that. But I think what I've seen at our church is the healthiest version of Christian community I've ever seen. Now, our church is not large. I think it is maybe by some standards. It's maybe 250, 300 people, I think. And we have a lot of kids. We're quite young. And I'm sure we'll plant. I know that we'll plant before we get to a 500 person church, surely. So we're not a church that if you want to be a church that cultivates community that's vulnerable and repentant and not interested in putting on a show, then you'll probably have a smaller church, and you kind of have to be okay with that. But if you want a large church, that's definitely not the way to go, because people don't like repenting of sin and changing their ways and going to a place that has a less than showy worship experience.
You brought out something that I find that is very interesting. You're talking about the unique factor, and not the unique factor, the authenticity. talking about that authentic factor.
Yeah.
You're a different generation than I am, but your generation, are you a millennial?
Yeah.
A millennial. Okay. So in speaking with a lot of different leaders, we've noticed, of course, these trends and traits of different generations. One of the things that I've noticed is the desire for authenticity has increased among millennials and especially with Gen Z.
Yeah.
And as we're looking at that, that seems to fly in the face because so many people are worried that if they are authentic, that they lose people. However, I think what COVID has brought to the surface and what our culture now is advocating for, and you reference this in the book, I'm going to use different language, but our social credit score is very low right now. And it's not socially advantageous to be in the church in many parts of the United States. There are some pockets where I'd say it's what I call a high Christendom culture, where the Christianity and it is a bigger factor. But in a low Christendom culture, it's really a not a pleasing thing. How do we help, though, our people move to this idea of not having the perfection, not having the performance, but cultivating the authenticity, because that hopefully shows the true reality of our spirituality. I feel like I'm getting ready to do a whole like spoken word as we're going through that. But how do we help people to be able to see that and these really harmful effects? Because we aren't going to become Luddites. We're not going to become Amish. Although I will say this, the younger generations that I'm seeing are getting off of social media, at least some forms of it.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing to me. I'm seeing people in their 20s going, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it, because they've seen the harmful effects. They were the digital natives. They said, no, I'm not going out in that anymore. I don't want that.
Yeah.
So how do we help people to see this? And I guess what I'm really saying is, how do we reprioritize in our life and make friendship a priority, which you mention in the book, and go from commercial value in relationships to an inherent value? I know I've kind of bridged different chapters of your book there, but how do we go about that?
There's a lot, and it's hard for me to summarize all that, because you're right. Each of those topics has its own chapter. I think you have to model this. Like, if we're speaking to church leaders, you have to model this. Like, when I was a kid, I mean, because I can only really compare to like what church was like when I was a kid, which was a very stereotypical Midwestern evangelical church experience, like Willow Creek model, slacks and sweater vests, like very, like suburban Midwestern evangelical church, not fundamentalist, but also not liberal, like pretty probably politically and theologically conservative. But it was very polished. It was very clean. I didn't hear a ton of talk about, I never heard church leaders talk about their sin or how they had to repent of certain things. I remember being taught that we should do that, but I didn't really see it like modeled. Now I could be mistaken, but I everyone seemed to kind of have it together. There wasn't a lot of mess, and I think as a church leader, again, having led in student ministry, I've been leading a student ministry since I was a high schooler in a few different church contexts, and being in a church where it is very much not the case, where everything is polished and messiness is very apparent. If you want people to live authentically as church leaders, you have to do it yourself. Like, you have to be willing to admit when you're an idiot, and when you sin, and repent of that. And like, our pastors all the time talk about, like, yeah, I really have not been good at this, and I've had to repent to the elders, and like, I've had to ask them to hold me accountable in this, or like, various things where it's important for us as church leaders to not act like everything's okay all the time. Like, my wife and I lead a community group, and when we have a really rough week in our marriage or with our daughter, which she's 3, and so that can be quite often these days, we talk about that. Like, we talk about that during community group. We don't act like everything's fine. And so I think, like, it doesn't mean if you share about how you've sinned or how rough your life is, that it's automatically going to get people to share. But it's certainly not going to work the inverse. Like, you're not going to get people to share about how rough their life is very frequently if you never do. And so I think if we want authenticity, and real community to be bred in our churches, we have to, as church leaders, whether you're a lay leader like me or you're a staff leader, you have to take the first step in that regard. Like, people can't see you as bulletproof and perfect. because otherwise they're going to feel like they need to be. And so you need to just show like, you can be not perfect and a Christian, and here's what that looks like.
But how do we even do that with social media? Because social media, we offer up our best self to the
Yeah.
world. We curate
Yeah.
that content. And if we get messy, people get nervous because this is not the avenue that you do that with. That's not necessarily the mechanism or the platform where you admit one's weakness, because then people start doing weird stuff. And you actually reference this in the book where one woman mentions her messiness, and then the pastor talks to her and she goes, that wasn't meant for you. I don't want my online life, I don't want the people in my offline life to know what's going on in my online life. And there was this distinction that was brought out. And how do we work through this, Chris? How do we go through that?
Yeah, that's hard. And that story is a harrowing one. And it was just one example of a few similar things where, a woman wasn't like caught in sin or doing something dumb on social media. She was kind of crying out for help because her life was in a rough spot, and the church reached out, and she got mad that the church reached out to help. She saw this distinction between, she kind of saw online life as a totally separate plane of existence from her offline life. And it was really eye-opening to them. And to me, I hadn't heard such a clear example of that. I think we see fruit of that a lot, where people act like totally different people online versus offline, but I never heard somebody just so explicitly say that. And there's a good question. I think a lot of times I have this weird perspective. It's very non-traditional in how people act online, being more authentically them. A lot of the most common refrain I've heard about social media and authenticity over the years is, social media is just where we present the best versions of ourselves, and it's like our most curated selves, and it's like we never share the bad things. And I'm like, I think that used to be true, and I think for some people on some platforms that is still true. I think of Instagram, and particularly like young women on Instagram in particular. Like, I think that is still like present the most polished version of yourself, like you're on vacation all the time or whatever, like everything is always awesome. And I think among a certain demographic and a certain platform, that is still the case. However, I think a lot of people are more unhinged and authentically themselves on social media than they are when they show up to church on Sunday. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, because I see what you're saying. And it actually reminds me, there was something in the news today where a guy actually posted on Twitter about his wife cheating on him with his best friend. And he went after it. Or people will put whatever political theory or conspiracy theory that they really believe, and they throw this kind of they post this verbal grenade, and it elicits a response. And sometimes you're like, okay, that's a hoax. Like, even me, I posted a quote. I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan, and someone that I respect posted a C.S. Lewis scholar, well-known, posted a C.S. Lewis quote. I reposted it, and a buddy of mine who runs the C.S. Lewis Society commented and goes, hate to tell you this, and he's calling me out online. He's like, this is not really Lewis. Because he goes, the C.S. Lewis Mafia will come after you. I've learned my lesson. So I like pulled it, and I'm glad that he called me on it. But I've seen so many people that would post stuff that they would never say, and they get more confidence. The whole picture of that video of the dogs barking at each other through the fence, and then they pull the fence back, and the dogs get really quiet.
Yeah,
that's what we're seeing. So that's what you're referring to there.
Yep. Yeah. It's this sort of keyboard courage. And I think
keyboard courage.
Yeah.
I like that.
And I think it's like, I think that the inverse has happened. Like, yes, people are sometimes less authentic online and are showing more polished versions of themselves. But I think the inverse is just as true among maybe a different demographic, where, like, I think in a lot of our churches, you could have a 55 or 60-year-old man who's like showing up to Sunday school, maybe he teaches Sunday school, and he's like he's great and he's awesome, and gotta love Uncle Bill, he's awesome. And then on Facebook, he's just like ranting and raving about how such and so political person is the Antichrist and And then he shows up on Sunday and everything's like, hey, it's Uncle Bill, he's great. How's it going, man? Good. Okay, cool. And it's like, what in the world? Which one is the authentic self? I think the church one is the more curated and polished one, and the one online is maybe more real. And so I think kind of both are going on, where sometimes online you have people faking it and offline life is different and worse. And sometimes you have people showing up to church and everything's cool, and then online they're showing kind of their true colors. And so whichever one you're dealing with, I think what the ultimate answer is, and I don't say that as though it's a sort of silver bullet, but I think the right answer is kind of the same for both, which is you have to plunge both of those people into immersive offline incarnational community, period. Like, Uncle Bill who's posting political rants on Facebook and young girl who's on Instagram posting about how her life is always awesome ought to be in community groups together, pulling out their real selves a little bit more in community with each other and sharing about their real lives. Because if all those two people do regarding their faith is show up to church on Sunday once a week, 3 times a month, and sometimes read their Bibles, it's like, who's getting to know them? Who knows who's the real version of themselves? Like, what is truly authentic, and who could possibly know that? And so that, like, this is why, like, we put such a huge emphasis on community group at our church. Like, you must go to one if you're a member. Like, if you're a member at our church and you don't go to community group, you will be called in pretty quickly and be like asked why you're not a part of a community group. Like, it's just kind of it is a requirement as much as anything is. And so I think, like, being a part of a smaller church community where, like, people know your name and can show up to your house in an instant if they need to, and can watch your kids if you need to attend to something, or have a meal if you have a kid, or whatever, like, that kind of intentional, incarnational, as I call it, church community is vital. It pierces through the person who's more authentic online or more fake online in the same way, because ultimately those people are not going to be able to hide, and they're going to have to talk about what life is really like in a community like that. You're not going to get that when they're standing in the back row of church singing songs and telling the pastor how good his jokes are.
There's so much about the embodiment aspect of not, I think of 2nd and 3rd John, where he says, I've written to you enough in paper and ink, and I long to see you face to face. That embodiment idea, I think, is intrinsic to the gospel message, that we can't do it apart from that. Even like right now, we're doing this via Zoom, but it's not the same when you're in person. It's just not. And I'm not trying to say it is. It still conveys an image. I mean, you know, both of us, how we're dressed, how we're talking, we're very sensitive to that. Which goes back to another part of your book where you mentioned discernment, foster discernment, something that I find that is very much lost. However, let me put this caveat on it. Being online early on, let's say, I'm a Gen Xer, but yet the internet was still newer. We were playing with it. I'm still not a digital native like my kids are. My kids are digital natives. There's certain things that I can see about the internet that they can't, because they haven't been around long enough. But there's other things that they see that I can't, because that's their world. That's the only world that they've known, and they see that distinction. And so I think to Hebrews, where it says through the constant practice of discerning good and evil, we get this idea of discernment. We've had to make that decision. How can we practice discernment better online in a world of spin doctors, fake news, and we've had a lot of neuroscientists or neurotheologians on the show. So we talk about enemy mode, going into this enemy mode where, and again, the man who first employed you wrote about the outrage that's online, and that draws. I mean, you even mentioned that in the book. Conflict draws people, humility doesn't. Yet Jesus calls us to be humble and not drawn into conflict unnecessarily for the conflict's sake. As a matter of fact, we're doing the opposite. So how do we work these seemingly conflicting things out in our Christian walk as we seek to go about to being ambassadors for Christ in the middle of this very strange online world?
I do a lot of consulting on social media strategy with churches and ministries and authors and stuff, and have over the years. And usually it's about like how to be better at Facebook or, you know, stuff like that. But talking about discernment, is always the hardest one, because it's hard. It's like one of those things that feels hard to teach. Because I'm the kind of person where I'm kind of naturally skeptical. So like, I generally don't believe something until I read it multiple places. Like, you know, if it's politician said X, Y, or Z today, I'm like, that sounds kind of bad. Did he really say it that way? And then I look at another place that I know might have a conflicting opinion about that same event. And like, if they reported the same way, I'm like, well, yeah, dang, he really did say it that way. Or like, oh, okay, that other outlet kind of reported it in a way that favors their ideological perspective. And I just like have I have the discernment to know, like, okay, this outlet tends to think this way, so they're more likely to leave that piece of context out, or that this content's more likely to give this, this outlet's more likely to give that politician the benefit of the doubt. So they're going to make sure to provide the whole context, but maybe also in a way that sounds more flowery and favorable than the other one did. So the truth's probably somewhere in the middle. I have like the patience to do that because I hate being duped. Like I hate being tricked more than anything. I'm going to be that parent when my daughter's 13 who's like, I don't care that you did that. I'm mad that you lied about, like that's going to be me. And that's me already in life. And so I hate being tricked and like led astray. So I've just kind of always naturally not wanted to be duped and tricked. And so I've always had a pretty high level of discernment. Not because I'm holier than anybody else, but more just because I don't like being tricked. But a lot of folks don't care about that. And I think we've learned that just in how social media has worked out over the years, that a lot of folks just want to be told what they want to hear and want to feel something. And so my biggest tip for like having discernment on the internet, beyond like, if you come across something that's controversial, especially most people get tripped up regarding politics, or even like matters of theological debate, let's say, those are the two things that if I ever have the misfortune of accidentally clicking over to my Twitter timeline, I see people writing about politics and theology. If you see something on the internet and you're like, wow, I can't believe that's true, you should say, well, maybe it's not. Okay. That's from this place. Can I find some place that would, maybe disagree with that outlet and see if they report the same thing happen, and see if they both report the same thing, then maybe there's some veracity to that. If they report different things, figure out why they're reporting different things and do the work. But if you don't want to do that, or if you can't do that, just slow down. And this is like, I talk about this in the book a good bit, I think, in that chapter on discernment. And I get a lot of this from Postman and his comments about like the evening news broadcast, that like, I don't think we're made to consume the measure of the world's news via our Twitter feed. I just don't think we're made for that. We're hit with, like, if you use social media with any regularity and try to consume content beyond like family photos and stuff like that, where like, if you're trying to like read about the news, which a lot of folks do, we're hit with so much content so fast. Our ability to discern is just crippled out of the gate. And so you read something or you watch a clip on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram that makes you feel a certain way. And we're just so lazy consumers, going back to the consumer idea, we're just so lazy consumers that we just assume that's true because it aligned with what we believed, and we just move on to the next thing. But we haven't sat down to like actually chew and eat our meal. It's like we're going to Golden Corral and just eating and throwing up constantly or whatever. Like we're not actually processing what we're consuming and considering it. We're just eating so quickly we can't even understand what it is that we're consuming. And so I attribute a lot of our lack of discernment in engaging on the internet, not only with like foolishness, and certainly that's a factor, but also just with like volume of just like how much it is we're consuming. And so my biggest piece of advice, if you don't want to do the work of like investigating a claim that you see, okay, fine. If you kind of want to be lazy, then just consume less of it. And maybe that will force you to slow down. But I have largely just gone to like, I don't look for ways to think via social media anymore. I don't know if that makes sense. That's a very vague statement. Like, I have a couple of columns for Twitter that are for news, but like when it comes to what's going on in the political space, I'm only going to read things that are like factual, that are like, I know are true, and then come to my own conclusions. I don't look for social media to tell me what to think anymore. And maybe that's a kind of a basic step for folks, is like, just don't go to social media for opinions at all. Now, some might say, oh, how can you tell? Okay, well, that's where you have to do like the sort of like comparison of like who told it what way and who told it another way. But consume less and read more widely. Those are the two most base ingredients, I suppose, to maybe starting to be a bit more discerning.
Well, I think that the reading more widely, especially, I would agree with, because you start to find out your opinion, that you villainized one opinion, and then you read them and you went, wait a minute, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
I need to understand, although that carries other ramifications if you stand against your people and your own mob, because you'll find out who your friends are and who's against you when you make a statement on one thing or the other. You'll get called
That's
out.
right.
But let's talk for a moment about the cultivating humility aspect of things. I know I brought that up too. How do we help cult humility in an environment that's all about narcissism?
You just have to play a different game. Like, you just have to not care. Like, the way you win social media is by, like, if you think of social media like a game, which I have historically, the way you win, like, is by going viral, getting followers, perhaps making money via your social media presence or whatever. That's the way you win in the eyes of a lot of people. But then you have to ask yourself, like, is that a game I want to win? And if you do, okay, then you have to ask yourself, like, how do you win? And I can tell you right now, like, I don't know how many Twitter followers I have, like 2,300 or something like that. If I wanted 23,000 Twitter followers, I know how to do that. I could have 23,000 Twitter followers by Labor Day. And I don't say that to, like, look at me. That would defeat the whole purpose of what we're talking about. But the point is, like, I know how to win the game, but I know that in order to win the game, I would have to do a lot of things that aren't worth winning the game. And I think when it comes to social media and you think, like, these are platforms powered by narcissism and putting ourselves at the center, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I know people who have effectively sold their souls to get massive social media followings, because, I mean, the number one way is to just become incredibly belligerent politically. Like, if you want to get a massive social media following, it's very easy. Just become very mean about very controversial political issues to all of the people who you think will hate you for saying those statements, and you'll get followers like crazy. Now, the question is like, is that a game you want to win? Like, is that what you want to do? And the answer is just like, no. That's why I don't have 23,000 Twitter followers. I have 2,300 or whatever. If you want to grow a massive following on Instagram, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but one of the easy ways to do it is, like, you post very, very, like, sexual pictures of yourself. That's a very easy way that you could get a lot of followers, like, especially if you're a woman and guys who are going on there for that kind of thing. You could easily do that. The question is, like, is that a game you want to win? And there are other ways to, quote, win the game that take more work and more effort and that sort of thing that I think are ethical. But the thing that we have to remind ourselves of is that the easiest way to succeed at having a social media presence are often things that we as Christians require strategies we would not be okay with pursuing. And so then you have to ask yourself, like, what is the purpose of social media for me? And what do I want it to do? And is that purpose and place in my life good to begin with? And that's where, if you don't have that level of knowledge and discernment, you have to have some friends speak into that for you. But if it is like, hey, yeah, I just want to use social media to, like, help people, encourage people with things the Lord's teaching me or that I'm reading from other people, then just do that. And then you'll get as many followers as are encouraged by those sorts of things or whatever. But if your goal is like, I want to get a massive following for X, Y, or Z, or I just want to get a big following because I want to be famous. Well, I know how you win. I know how you win, and I don't encourage that, and I don't pursue that myself. So how do you live online in a place that celebrates narcissism and be humble? Is you don't have to play the game that it feels like the platforms are beckoning you to play. You can just play the game you want to play and have your own goals for what that looks like.
Well, even as our team, we've had this discussion, because I know that if I made some post about progressive Christianity being of the devil, I'm going to get 10, 25,000 people. I just know that I would. I mean, and our audience is nowhere near that big, but you just say that. And I've seen it. I've seen the people do it. You say something about LGBTQ or whatever you want to say, and people will just go crazy because, and I think I'm not sure if you mentioned this or I read this somewhere else recently, but if you want to go viral, lies go viral faster than truth does. And lies move quick. And this is why I think you also quoted Eugene Peterson's the long obedience in the same direction, or is that the title of it, which I think is an
A
excellent
long obedience in the same
a
direction.
long obedience in the same direction. Simply for the reason that Christianity is the long, hard road. The difficulty is when you see people that you would consider to be your peers that live in the same quote unquote area code that you do, or the ministry space that you occupy, who are willing to use those methods and get that following and even possibly get funding. I mean, you're in the marketing industry, and I thought it was interesting that you mentioned you are using a different set of measurables as you go through to be what is effective and what's not. But I found that in the church, that was becoming one of the drawers as we started developing criteria where there were incentives for having so many people in your small group or church attendance, or how many baptisms you had, financial incentives. Now they would say this is, we don't want this to become an idol in itself, and it can be, and Jesus promises reward, yes, but somehow I feel like if I'm getting the reward from you in a paycheck, I'm not going to get the reward from Jesus in my obedience. But yet we see many of these quote unquote larger churches being passed off as examples we are to follow because the end justifies the means, and they have large crowds who will play to the celebrity pastor and leader who sells books because they gain a following. And we do live in this world. You occupy space just as much as I do, that no one's going to want to, they're not going to want to take a manuscript from you unless it sells so many copies.
Sure.
That's the reality in which we live. The same here. People will measure the success of my show. How many followers do you have?
Yeah.
And while that is a reality, it can't be the only means of demarcation. So how do we separate that? And what are the criteria that we do look to in order to employ to be biblically faithful?
Yeah.
And yet fiscally responsible.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can speak to this and give a little bit of insider perspective on the publishing industry. So I sit on our publishing board at Moody Publishers and our leadership team that ratifies the decisions of the publishing board. So every Tuesday we have a group of people, I think it's about 20 people, who get together and review manuscripts and proposals from potential authors and decide whether or not we want to make offers on those books. And a lot of factors go into whether or not we decide to make an offer on a book. The two primary things I guess you could say are, well, I guess maybe it's three. There are a lot, but if I had to boil it down, is the writing good? Does it fit us as a publisher, like who we are and what we're about? And do we think we can sell this book? Because there are plenty of ideas we see and the writing is good enough, if not great, that we're like, yeah, we like what this person's saying, but we don't really know if we could sell it. Not because they're not famous, but just because, like, are people buying this book? Is this still a need? Is the market flooded with it? There are so many factors. But one of the parts of our discussion that's often the most heated or the longest is around like how well known a person is, because so much today is like, if you have 100,000 followers on every social media platform, you're more likely going to get a lot more money for your book than somebody who has 1,000 followers on every social media platform, naturally. And some may say that's petty and lame and awful. And like in one respect, like, yeah, I get that, especially depending on how those followers were acquired. But let's assume that the person with 100,000 followers on every platform got them legitimately by being an expert in whatever it is they're wanting to write a book about. Well, as a publisher, wanting to publish with them isn't like, I don't see it as like vain or like shallow so much as like they're clearly a trusted voice on this topic, and we could make the financially responsible decision of signing this person because we know that we could sell this book. Whereas like if that same topic only had and the person had 1,000 followers on every platform, like, well, they may be an expert, they might have a degree, but if only 1,000 people or so know them as an expert, do we feel, we're gonna have to invest a lot of money in publishing this book beyond whatever we pay them, printing and all of that. Do we think we could sell enough of this book in order to, like not go under, that kind of thing? And so I think it's not all bad for us in ministry to be looking at numbers of followings, but for us as a publisher, I can only speak for us, not others, but I think others in our space think similarly. It's not a matter of like number of followers so much as a demonstration of expertise and a proof of expertise in the eyes of other people. So we look at as much as a publisher at, if an author has published at a number of different outlets and what those outlets are and how frequently. So if there's an author who, yeah, maybe they only have 1,000 Twitter followers, but gosh, they write in these 5 websites that have a significant following pretty regularly, and they're seen as a resident expert by not only those editors at those publishers, at those, you know, those magazine publishers or whatever, but also theoretically by the readers there. So regardless of how many followers they have, they're seen as an expert by these reputable institutions and whatever. So I think all of that's to say is it can be really foolish to only look at numbers, but sometimes numbers can be an indicator of healthy fruit. And it's important for us to carry a lot. And we've had a lot of discussions about this over the last few years since I've been at Moody and on the pub board, of like just how to tell what's a healthy following on social media and what's an unhealthy following on social media, as far as like, did they get these things legitimately? How are they conducting themselves online? I mean, I know we've looked at proposals and decided not to proceed because of how people conduct themselves online, even though they might have a ton of followers, because maybe that's how they got those followers to begin with. And so all of these things are an important factor, and we need to not get caught up in numbers, but we also need to not just like shun numbers either. I think it's a matter of recognizing that like not all social media followings are created equally, even if they are the same in number. And we have to do a bit more deeper evaluation and discernment regarding how people get followings and what that really indicates.
Talking about that, though, that actually just simply transitions me into the understanding of authority. Is this person an authority? But understanding authority in the internet age, as you mentioned, all it takes is one person and a keyboard to bring down a government any longer. This is the world that we live in, where institutions are losing credibility, the church is losing credibility, and now everyone, and this is what you mentioned, the internet gives everyone an equal voice in a way that they perhaps shouldn't have, simply because they lack the ability. They might use the shock value. These are the people that are the YouTube influencers. And you even mentioned that some of the kids today, there's a large percentage of them that would rather be YouTube influencers than they would be astronauts, which my son was shocked. He's 9. And he said, I mean, he loves YouTube influencers like Mr. Beast, but he he would rather be an astronaut, quite honestly. And I'm gonna continue to massage that. But how do we work through that and help our people to work through that when their understanding of authority is becoming so warped and shifted, even when they may not realize it yet?
Yeah, that's tough. And the influencer bit, I wrote about this recently, actually, that like, in one sense, like I don't fault those kids who would rather be an influencer than an astronaut, because it's like, would you rather get paid a bunch of money to work on a rocket ship and go to space, or would you rather get paid a bunch of money to make goofy videos with your friends? I mean, both sound kind of appealing. Yeah, I mean, like I understand it. You know, I'm not gonna.
Isn't that Mark Roper? Didn't he do that?
He gets to do both, right? Like he gets to do both. He's living the dream. He's living the dream. The dude publishes one YouTube video a month and he gets more views than anybody else. It's pretty amazing. He's awesome. He's great.
He is incredible. He's pretty incredible.
And he's the picture. I would love to ride on him sometime, because he's a picture perfect version of like what an ideal influencer should be, in my view. But that's a whole other conversation. He's just great. He's really great. And I think he's trying to do great things for kids and using his platform as an influencer not to promote foolishness. Even like, I don't find Mr. Beast to be a problem, but his stuff's just kind of like goofy and you know, whatever.
Yeah, I know what you
Whereas
mean.
it feels like Roper's doing some like constructive, cool stuff, you know? So anyway,
even his son has like a severe autism, and he brings him in. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I mean, Mr. Beast is like some of the crazy stuff he does. And it drives me crazy because then my kids want whatever he hawks.
Oh yeah.
Like, I want a Mr. Beast burger. I'm like, dude, it's just a burger. Stop it.
I wrote on him recently. You should go read what I wrote. It was it kind of made some people mad, but it was also, I thought it was helpful, if I could do say so myself, because I think in if we can talk YouTubers for a second, in the realm of every popular YouTuber of the last 5 to 7 years, Mr. Beast is like one of the first ones I would recommend a 13-year-old go watch, compared to like the Paul brothers. Good heavens. But like, bro, I mean, 5 years ago, they were bigger than Mr. Beast. So like, honestly, I'll take Mr. Beast over the Paul brothers all day. But I think we need to pump the brakes on the philanthropy bit because I think he's using people as much as he's helping people. But that's another. What was the question about
authority?
not
I
authority?
mean,
Authority, yes.
because we're giving
Authority.
people voices that shouldn't necessarily have them. I mean, even with Mr. Beast, he's a great marketer. He's done a lot of stuff out there. But I'm like, do I really want to see him get with his friends and go into some abandoned school and playing real life game of assassins?
Right.
You know, how many it could be on a desert
Right.
island. It's like, I guess this is something that you come up with, you're in high school, but it's not something that really is helping cultivate virtue.
I watched this dude. I watched, I mean, his Squid Game video is one of the best YouTube videos I've ever seen. Like, it's just amazing. His recreation of the TV show Squid Game, the games and stuff. It's amazing. But it's like, do I, like, in 5 years, is this guy gonna like tell me what I should be thinking about some ideological issue? It's like, he's gonna become a broader authority. And I think we've seen that across. You have Instagram influencers going from hawking makeup to telling you how to vote in the next election. It's like, is this how I'm supposed to, what is going on?
Well,
and so
that's even what happened. I mean, taking it out of the internet world, but like LeBron James, when he started, and then one woman said, shut up and dribble. And that got into serious trouble because, because he's I think an influencer.
Yeah, right. And I think let me say, I think all these people should be able to do whatever they want as far as advocate for whatever they want to advocate and things like that. But I think as viewers, we should ask, like, because I appreciate how this dude shoots and dunks at basketball, or because I appreciate the entertainment value of this guy's videos, do I need to go buy their food or subscribe to their ideological view on this thing? That's such a big jump, right? Like, I would love to learn from Mr. Beast and his YouTube strategy, but I don't need to tell him what I should think about the upcoming election, kind of a thing. I think we could. But again, a 13-year-old doesn't know the difference between those things. I don't want to say it's just the young person issue, though. I think it's fair to say it's primarily among them. About authority, I don't like how it wants to. So, like, I've always had authority problems. My parents would tell you, and it's true, because I'm just the kind of person who's like, okay, like, your position doesn't matter to me. Like, prove you're worth listening to. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just kind of always how I've been wired, is like, I know you're my mom, but like, tell me why that justifies me, like, listening to what you're saying here. I was a joy. I was the kid.
The backhand came.
I was the kid. See, I was the biggest reason I was a pain is because I was a perfect kid at school and then super annoying to my parents.
Isn't that for any kid? I mean, I love my kids, but they're super annoying.
Right.
And they would say the same about me. Dad, you're super annoying.
Right. So in some sense, I love the flattening of authority that the internet brings. Like, I really do love that to some extent. Like, I think it's kind of cool. But at the same time, I think we all know how that can get really bad really quickly. In that, like, just because someone says something, a lot of things can unravel really quickly. Now, I think this has sort of started to tail off a little bit. Like, I've seen more pumping of the brakes regarding, call it cancel culture, on like Twitter than I've seen in the past. In the past, it was like, it literally would just take one person talking about how awful another person was, and then it's just like this snowball of, like, before you know it, somebody's fired. And I don't see that like quite as much as I used to. And I, maybe it's because I'm on social media less, because my job doesn't revolve around it. But like, you don't see as many stories about, like, person is a jerk to somebody in a coffee line, it goes viral and they get fired from their job. It's like, you don't see that stuff quite as frequently as you used to. And I hope that means it's happening less. But I think there is a sort of, like,
an awareness, you think?
Yeah. Of like, hey, maybe this is getting out of hand. Like, I hope that we're going that way.
Well, I hope so. I full disclosure, I started this Facebook group for Moody, because I'd gone to Moody years ago.
Yeah.
So before, like, right at the dawn of Facebook, right there when the sun was starting to shine, Moody wasn't on there yet. And I started a Facebook alumni group for Moody. Didn't touch it for 12 years. Didn't do anything. Wow. And it gathered 1,500 people in that amount of time. Now, Moody started their own Facebook group, and I didn't even make a post. Every once in a while, I'd say something. Well, right before George Floyd happened, I decided, like, when the pandemic just broke out, I think right around that time, maybe it was, I can't remember, my timeline's messy, but it was before George Floyd. And I remember making a post, and I thought, oh, I might as well put a cover photo on this. So I got this photo and I put it on there. And I, just kind of banal questions like, hey, what was the best thing about Moody when you were there? What's a fond memory? Fond professor? What'd you like in the cafeteria? That kind of thing. George Floyd happens. Somebody makes a post about George Floyd and kind of being up in arms about what's going on. And then someone says, hey, let's not talk about politics in here. And they said, oh, this isn't politics. And then it snowballs. And then people, like some people, and remember, this is gathered 1,500 people, and many of them are older. I would say that they're north of 65, and they're there for nostalgia. They don't understand the political ramifications. This is just not what you do. It's just like the older generation. You don't talk about politics and religion. And even in your home, like if you come into my home, like you can talk in my living room, but you're not going to have a conversation with me in my bedroom. Okay. It's just not how it is. It's just not how it's done. So they make these comments online and pretty hurtful things, like younger people that are coming on that are more of Moody grads going after the person who's been out for 50 years. And again, they're very much digital natives fighting with those who are not, saying these very horrible things. I was so disturbed by the conversation that I saw, because I'm the moderator. And I hadn't posted any rules because we hadn't needed any yet. When I started it, that was my own fault, hindsight's 2020.
Right.
And so I don't know if it's a mistake or not, but one woman said, I couldn't even sleep last night because of the post that I saw on here. This is an older woman. So I said, okay, I'm deleting the conversation. So I delete the conversation. That was a huge problem.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because people are like, where is it? Where is the conversation? Next thing I know, they're calling Moody racist.
Oh boy.
And and I'm like, what's going on? And I'm watching the snowball happen right in front of my eyes. Because for me, this wasn't what I created that for. This was for nostalgia, connection.
Sure.
It wasn't to be a political forum. That's not what I created it for. And so suddenly Moody is being named as this racist entity. And next thing I know, I'm on a Zoom call with the PR department. And they're like, first of all, you did nothing wrong. This is a crazy time that we're in. And I said, here's the deal. Because I'm now spending hours. Like I spent more hours in a 24-hour period on this group than I had in 12 years.
Good heavens.
And so I'm like, all right, what do I do? I said, here's the deal. Either you take over the page or I delete it. That's just it. There's an alumni page now. It's not necessary. When I created it, that's not what it was for. They said, can you delete it? We have no right, like you created this, your own personal thing. I said, no problem. So I go on there. The thing is because I created it, and I don't know what the rules are now, but I had to delete each user individually from the forum. So I make an announcement that I'm deleting the page. This isn't the purpose of it. It served its purpose, some kind of vague, politically correct answer. People are like, racist. I mean, they start screaming at me. I'm like, first of all, I pastored a multi-ethnic church. I mean, I hosted meetings that were talking about people dealing with racial issues and trying to bring it out into the church and these type of issues. But yet people are labeling me that way. And suddenly I'm getting canceled and they know nothing about who I am. And as I'm deleting them one by one, you can just see that, it's like almost like blood trickling down the screen as they're being deleted. And I had an intern from Moody helping me. She started at Z and I started at A, and we just deleted. But the point was, it brought out something to me. I went, this is not the forum. Like it got to the point where it's like, now I don't want to say, and I know a lot of people are this way. I don't want to say anything. To me, if it's cat videos and dog videos and what's going on with the kids and graduation of Mother's Day, we're happy.
Yep. And that's really great. And that's a good perspective. And I think Postman talks about that regarding the TV. Basically, he says that in Amusing Ourselves to Death, that the television is best used as a medium for like frivolities, not a medium for serious things, because it rips away the reverence. He has a whole, Postman was not a Christian, but he was like sympathetic to Christians. Like he did a lot of things he partnered with Christian organizations a lot.
But you also mentioned that in the book too, where he mentions, I'm not a Christian, but this seems to, and he
he has a whole chapter on televangelism, and he's basically like, hey, I'm paraphrasing, he's like, this gospel seems like the thing of utmost eternal importance to Christians, and I don't really know that these TV preachers recognize that they're cheapening the message that they're communicating by communicating it through the television. and running it alongside like, detergent ads and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, he's got a point. And I think the same
He
applies
does
to
have a
social media.
point.
Like, as much as I think that, and I'm not anti social media, I think social media can be used for good and can be helpful for ministry when used supplementally and in some like really tactful ways. I'm not anti social media, let me say. However, I like social media best when it's used for sports and video games and things that are goofy and don't really matter, rather than when it's used to like out people for terrible things and all of these super heavy theological debates or political ideological debate. I think social media is best used for more lighthearted things than more important things, because I think the things that are most important in life are best communicated about not through social media. And I think we rip away some of the importance and reverence that we should give deeper, more important topics when we communicate about them in the primitive means of social media rather than in more in-person and incarnational way. I mean, it's like trying to recreate the Mona Lisa with sidewalk chalk or something like that. It's like, you're going to debate about the Trinity on Twitter. Are you serious? Like, don't you recognize what that's doing to your debate? It's severely inhibiting it.
You can't, because you can't engage with nuance.
Yeah.
But it's just words on a page, and that leaves you the freedom to read those words the way that you think it's being said, rather than what it actually is being said. And then people get into that kind of ad hominem arguments with one another.
Yeah,
and
I used to get in fights on social media all the time when I was like just coming out of college and just getting started in my professional life, and I loved getting in theological debates on social media. And then eventually I was just like, this isn't doing anything for me except making me mad and making me feel better about myself, because I feel like I've bested somebody in like a fencing match about a theological topic on Twitter or whatever. And I just was like, this isn't good for anyone. It's just making me feel better. But I was starting to be enlightened to how it was like, it was like just like shoveling candy into my mouth. It's like, oh, this makes me feel better. Oh no, I feel terrible. It's like that's what it was kind of doing to me.
Well, Mike Heiser made a comment about this before he passed away, obviously, because you don't make a comment after you passed away. But he said that, he goes, when you engage online debate, he goes, it's not against the other person that you're actually debating. He goes, it's the comments that are being written. That's the ones who are reading the comments are the people that you're actually is your real audience.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a valid thing, or should we not even engage that debate whatsoever? Like, is there any benefit?
I do not. So here's my personal policy. I do not get in any argument or discussion
that you can't win.
With that would mean I get in all of them. No, I'm joking.
Where's that humility chapter?
I told you my parents had a problem with me, man. I don't get in any disagreement of any kind, however level of heated, whether about who's the best NBA player of all time and why it's LeBron, or a theological topic. I don't get in any debate like that on social media with somebody I do not know personally. Period. I simply do not. I engage with people I don't know personally online, but only if it's like, tweeting a goofy GIF in response to something they tweeted, or if they say, hey, I read your book, thanks for writing, and I'll say, yeah, thanks for reading, whatever. I'll engage with anybody, any stranger in that way. But I'm not going to disagree with somebody about anything silly or serious on the internet that I don't know personally. Now, if it's like one, I think like exception I can think of is there are a lot of other writers about social media, especially like non-Christian ones, that I kind of try to learn what they're saying and then translate it to like my Christian audience, if you will. I will like comment on their stuff and say like, hey, think about it. Like, I see what you're saying. Try thinking about it from this perspective. Let me know what you think. Like, I'll engage with them, but I see it less as like a debate and more of just like a comment card from someone. I feel like those things are a little bit different. Like, bring back blog comment sections, because some people from those days may disagree with me, but I think like, frankly, more constructive conversation and debate or argument can happen there than in social media, because there's less of an instant nature to it. And also the other principle I have is if I ever do find myself in that situation, I attempt to take it private as soon as possible. That was my principle when I was running social media at Lifeway, because as long as you're doing it publicly, you're doing it in front of an audience, and people are going to be tempted and possibly motivated to conduct themselves in a way to please the people who are following them, rather than in a way that solves whatever disagreement and makes progress regarding any disagreement you have.
I know some well-known theologians that got into some debates, and one said, he had mentioned this to a friend of mine, and he said, I'm going to make a comment on this because this is going to drive thousands of people to my blog. And I thought that to me is very narcissistic. However, I'm still in that place where it's like, you want to get viewers, you want to get listeners, you want to get eyeballs, but I want it because I believe it's true. Not necessarily that I need to have a massive following. I mean, maybe it'd be cool if there was some type of verification system where almost like there was a social media manifesto and you got like a star, and then people could vote whether or not you actually were part of that. Maybe, that's something for Mark Zuckerberg and for Elon Musk to be able to do that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not going to do that. But as we're finishing up our time, we've talked a lot here. I do want to finish up and talk about a couple more things, if that's all right. Just kind of the last few chapters. I mean, we could talk about the sex chapter, but there's a lot more to that, I think, that you could find. But I want to talk about the stuff that I see a lot of people dealing with right now is anxiety. And you mentioned grapple with anxiety and how much anxiety has been exponentially expanded or grown since the advent of the iPhone. And even, I mean, I'm not sure if you said iPhone, but the social media, the platforms that are there, it's definitely, especially among teen girls, and you alluded to that. And I remember discussing this with Jay Kim. He said, I'm going to venture to say that in about 20 years, maybe 30, could be even 50, the people are going to look back on now and say that cell phones, these iPhones, are the equivalent of cigarettes in the back of a pocket, and its addiction. And do you think, because of the exponential increase in anxiety, that ever will something like that will happen where people actually see it as an evil?
I want to think that's true. I wonder if we'll all just continue to be blinded by that. One of the things that I've said, some folks throughout interviews I've done for this book and the previous one asked me, are you optimistic about the future of the internet?
I watched Terminator. No.
Yeah. It's the easy answer. The easy answer is no, for a lot of reasons. Like, I think there's a lot to be pessimistic about, frankly, regarding, like, it just doesn't seem to be getting, our relationship with the internet doesn't seem to be getting a whole lot better. Like, I've seen glimmers of hope. Like maybe people not piling on so quickly in certain areas or things like that. But the thing that is most encouraging to me is that, so we've been living in a situation in which the adults in the room don't understand how the internet foundationally works. Like, if you've seen any of these tech CEOs go before Congress, and the foolish questions that these Congress people ask them nothing has made me want to run for office more than watching Mark Zuckerberg get grilled by some senator from Vermont about some inane question. And I'm just like, there are so many more important things you could be asking right now. Why are you asking this dumb question? I'm like, your team did not prepare you well. Now, in a few more recent instances, I've seen better questions, but 5-7 years ago, especially like following Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that with Facebook, where they were selling information to Russia's in the 2016 election, there have been better lines of questioning. But historically, like, the people who should be keeping a lot of these like companies in check and protecting young people, frankly, just don't understand social media at all and are not equipped to protect their kids and grandkids who are suffering the negative effects. So in a couple decades, people my age, your kids, will be eligible to maybe be running for office or having other positions of authority and power such that they could regulate these companies a little bit. Now, I understand a lot of people, especially Christians, are like not particularly a fan. When I say the word regulation, they get all tense, and it's like government regulating social media. Isn't that like government regulating speech? And it's like, okay, we're going to have to figure out the whole free speech social media conversation is an incredibly important one. And I think we need to be really careful about letting people just do whatever they want on social media in the name of free speech, and and not being willing to restrict social media at all in the name of free speech, particularly use. Like I saw recently, it's Montana, is it, that is giving an age restriction on TikTok or something like that, or
Yeah,
social media in
yeah.
general. Utah, I think, as well, is giving us a 16-year-old restriction on social media.
Isn't it Louisiana? I mentioned something about that, like 16 years of age or something.
A few state legislatures are trying to say basically until you're 16, you can't use social media without whatever permission. And I think, like, I love the heart of those ideas. I think it's impossible to enforce. I don't know how anybody's going to enforce that unless the platforms get involved. But I think my hope is that basically parents and grandparents and people in positions of power that could be reining in social media platforms today have never had to experience the very harmful effects of social media.
Well, this is where you've delved into this ethical issue. It's not, to me, it's more than free speech because of what the dopamine is doing to the brain. It's actually a chemical thing.
Sure.
Well, but this also goes into kind of like the Henry Center for Bioethics in Deerfield. You were talking about that earlier, where you even get into the cloning aspect. And I know I'm bringing in something totally different. The question is not, and my editor loves to say this all the time. He always loves to quote Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park. You asked if you could, but you never asked if you should.
Yeah.
And I think what you're seeing now is more of the cigarette conversation, and even the cloning. Is this something that we do, that it's harmful at the basic psyche of who we are?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily about free speech. This is about behavior in mental orders. And this is a thing that we've not seen in our time. And of course it has to take time to catch up.
And I agree that, like, I think that we need to be willing to give up our right to free speech on social media in a lot of ways because of the negatives the negatives of reeling in social media are definitely worth it to me. Like, even if you feel like you're giving up some sort of free speech, like, I think we need to be willing to give up some of our perceived freedoms to reel in social media. To quote another Jurassic Park line along these lines, the problem is, and this is where I feel like this kind of thing is just really hard to do, is life finds a way. As they say in Jurassic Park, I believe, life finds a way. If you could put all kinds of regulations in, and I think people are just always going to find ways to get around them. Like,
well, you mentioned in the sexuality chapter where you said you could just put all the restrictions you want, but you have to deal with the human heart.
That's right. That's what, and that's really like you have to be 13 to use social media apps. Virtually every social media app requires you to be 13 to sign up. You know how many 10 and 12-year-olds use these darn apps? Like,
all the time.
Yeah. Like, so what are you going to do? Like, you're going to like serve a parking ticket to a 12-year-old for using Instagram? Like, what's going on? Like, how are you actually going to do this?
Unless you had some type of independent verification system, like,
you
like an ID.
Right. For a 13, like, it's like,
are you going to,
yeah. And then you talk about privacy. Gosh. I mean, you talk about privacy issues. So like, I'm in favor of all kinds of protections, especially for young people. However, I think practically the outworkings of that get very sticky very fast.
Well, even in the free speech part that you just mentioned, because I know people are going, wait, whoa, don't go there. But the question then becomes, if my speech is limited, I am following the trajectory of somebody's communicating something.
Right.
And I need to have the ability to be able to speak against that big tech, if you will, because it's trying to convey meaning, whether we realize it or not. Everything's conveying some type of meaning because it's not amoral.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so I think so do I think phones will be like cigarettes? I hope we view them that way. I just don't know if our view of them is going to get negative fast enough. Like, I think it may take time. But I'm hopeful that the teenagers and 20 somethings who are alive today doing their thing, who have experienced the scourge on mental health that social media has, of always having the hallway in your pocket, they will be in positions of power in a matter of a couple of decades to maybe do something about that. And I think part of the reason their parents and grandparents, those generations, those ages haven't been, is because they haven't experienced it firsthand in the same way a lot of these younger people have. And my hope is that those younger people who are now 14 to 24, when they're 44 to 64, actually do something about that. But we'll see.
When you were talking in the book, you referenced a study that was shelved that had been done on Facebook. Describe that for a moment, because that was eye-opening.
Yeah, so this is pulling back in the mental library, Wall Street Journal in 2020. This was before their big Facebook papers, but it ended up being a part of their big Facebook papers report. The Wall Street Journal in 2020 reported on Facebook's internal research team. I'm paraphrasing and may get a couple details wrong, so don't sue me, just go read the actual thing. Facebook's internal research team, I want to say around like 2017, did a study to figure out what kind of content performed best on Facebook, what kept people on Facebook the longest. And their internal, Facebook's internal, not outside independent, internal research team came back and said, effectively, they had a whole PowerPoint deck that the Wall Street Journal got a hold of and published, said negative content, controversial content, content that ignited heated debates, performed the best on Facebook and was floated to the top in the algorithm. Basically, people were more likely to see conflict-oriented content than more chill content, if you will. And people stayed on Facebook and used Facebook longer if they engaged negatively with content than if they engaged positively with content. And I think the internal research team said that may not be good, that's the case. And Facebook said, okay, thank you, internal research team, for reporting that. We'll decide whether or not that's good. And they put it away and didn't do anything about it for some period of time. And it was never known until the Wall Street Journal, it was leaked to the Wall Street Journal a number of years later. Facebook says, we did change things. We changed it this way, that way. I mean, this was like if you think of the algorithm in like different points are assigned to different ways you can react to posts, right? You can react with like a frowny face or a heart, or like a frowny face was giving a post 3 points, and a smiley face was giving, or a like was giving a post 1 point. And it's so like if you think of it like a post gets ranked in an algorithm based on how many points it gets, it's more likely to be toward the top of your feed if it has a lot more points. And it was getting more points if people were reacting more negatively to it than if they were reacting positively to it. And so they were basically, Facebook knew that negative content kept people on platform longer. And so they kept floating negative content to the top to keep people on platform longer, sowing division and conflict and things like that. And that's a problem for like 100 reasons. Like that gets me more fired up than like these platforms favoring one political ideology over the other, because like this is bad for everyone. like this is bad for everyone. Like people talk about the biases of social media platforms, and they often mean political. And I'm like, but this is like worse. Like this is far worse for everybody. And I think there are a number of points to derive out of that. I think a couple are, we need to remember that these platforms exist to make money, not to serve us. Like we are not the customer. The advertiser is the customer, and we are the data product. And so like, if you ever get sentimental or feel good about like, oh, I just love Twitter or I love Instagram, they don't love you. Like they don't like you. They don't feel anything. You are fodder to them. Like you're nothing to them. Your data is everything, but you are really nothing. And the other thing is, beyond recognizing that we don't really matter. Secondly, we need to recognize that these social media platforms are designed to deliver us more deeply into our desires, not deliver us from our desires. And a lot of us desire conflict more than we desire peace. And these platforms are designed So like, oh, you like conflict? You clicked frowny face? Well, let me give you more frowny face content. Oh, you commented something nasty on that post from that political rival? Well, now you're just going to get more of that political rival's content. These social media platforms are sort of like recursive, like feedback loops. And a lot of times that's talked about like, they deliver you more into your biases. Yeah, but sometimes they can just like deliver you more into sin, like into like destructive, whether it's like lust, like you look at one picture of a woman who's dressed in barely any clothing and they just give you a bunch more of them, or you engage negatively with a political ideology and they just deliver you more of that. So it makes you more mad. Like these things are designed to deliver us more deeply into our desires, not deliver us from them. And even though we're Christians and we're hopefully leaving our fleshly desires behind, we're all aware that we're not, and we can sometimes get caught up in these things. So I think it's important for us to recognize that these platforms are not in favor of us. They're not out for our good. They're out for our eyeballs, and the ways they get our eyeballs are often not for our good.
These are so many different concepts that we're dealing with and struggling with every day. This is where I think the rubber meets the road of our Christian expression. And one of the things that I think your book does, it brings a lot of language, identification, awareness. I remember a seminary professor telling me years ago, part of our job as ministry leaders is to give people the language to know how to name their world, in essence, to know what's good, what's bad. And I think you've done that. You've done that quite well. It was very interesting to read your perspective on so many different things. And I immediately, as I was going through the book, I started to ask myself a lot of my own questions, knowing why am I driven? Why do I do that? Why does the internet do that? Even in the mention of the desires that it seeks to cultivate, there were some videos that came up in one of my news feeds that were just shocking. And I immediately reported them. And it says, okay, banned, blocked it, did that fine. Then it gives me more. And I went, wait a minute, I'm trying to get rid of that, not less. But the fact that I had some type of interaction with it, they wanted me to do more. And it, as you said, the self-fulfilling prophecy and more outrage, which really makes you angry. Because, as you said before, because you're being manipulated at the depth of who you are. One of the things that we like to do when we close the show is give people what we call the water bottle for the week. We are Apollos watered, and we want to water the faith of people. What is one concluding water bottle that we can give to people for them to sip on this week?
It's all going to be okay. The end of the story has been written. The battle's already won. I think if you're listening to this as a parent who maybe your kid has an unhealthy relationship with social media, or even you do, or you're a community group leader and you know that people in your community group are caught up in things on social media, habits, addictions that they shouldn't be, or you're a pastor and you feel like, man, my church, like folks are just getting a lot more feisty and challenging my authority in my church than they used to. And you're beginning to wonder, is this because they're on social media a lot and they're fighting on social media and that's spilling over into my church? I've heard that story a lot. If you find yourself in a sort of desperate spot in any of those places, I say at the opening of the book that social media is the most powerful discipleship force in the world today. And I think that because the average adult spends 2.5 hours a day on social media, and we don't spend 2.5 hours a day doing anything else except sleeping and working. So I do think that's true. However, I think the Holy Spirit, though not a force, is a much more powerful discipleship force in himself than even social media, and that God can overcome social media because he created the people who created social media. Remember, social media is not, as much as it feels this way, social media is not some alien technology that was dropped onto us from elsewhere. This is why I have no problem claiming that social media is bent toward evil and sin and not a neutral force, because humans who are broken and bent towards sin built social media. We wrote our biases into the code. And so I think if you are needing a word of encouragement, no, you don't need me to tell you. It's kind of scary out there sometimes, especially with regard to social media and how we feel like people are being discipled by social media more than anything else. But the Holy Spirit can overcome that, working through you in your faithfulness, in your leadership, in your discipleship of others. The Holy Spirit can use 30 minutes in a week to overcome 2.5 hours a day. In your coffee date that you have with that friend in your community group, the Holy Spirit can use that to push back against the lies those people have maybe been fed by their Instagram feed for 2 hours a day over the course of last week. And so while I advocate in the book for fighting time with time and how intensive discipleship and spending a lot of time with people is very important, I do think the Holy Spirit can work in very short periods of time and in side conversations after church and after community group or whatever else. But we need to get ourselves in the room with people. I think we need to not be sucked into the idea that we can do things, that we compete with online influences with more online influence. I don't think that's the right answer. I think we do have to fight time with time, but I don't think we fight social media discipleship with Christian content on social media discipleship. I think we do it by getting people in person and doing embodied ministry together. And I just want to encourage you that the Holy Spirit can work through your work. You don't have to try to do it on your own. And the God who made the people who made social media is the God of social media. And so you can trust him to disciple your people, even when you feel like you maybe are incapable of doing so.
That's a good word. Chris, thank you for coming on the show. I do recommend the book. I give it an Apollos Watered recommendation. I actually want to try to get a box and pass this out to other people. I think it's that helpful. I really do.
Thanks, Tim.
And I did enjoy it. I found it to be very insightful. I found it to be very biblically faithful and helping us to discern this very difficult thing and keeping us grounded. But well done. Well done.
Thanks.
In writing the book. And may God continue to use this to use it to bless his people and his kingdom for their glory and his joy, or his glory and their joy.
I got you.
All right, brother. Thank you so much for coming on Apollos Watered.
Thanks for having me.